Hokage, Chronicle of the True Farewell. Hey! Look who's back for more adventures. We love having you here to continue this story that keeps us all awake. Important note, all of this is pure fiction, so don't try any techniques you hear here in real life. Your neighbor might call the cops. This amazing novel and all its rights belong to the original author. We're just the ones giving it voice and drama. Are you enjoying the show? Prove it by subscribing to our YouTube channel and leaving that like that motivates us so much. And if you want VIP access to exclusive content, our Patreon is waiting with things you won't find anywhere else. Chapter 376, Choice. The success or failure of the war depends on your decision. You said. Hidden, Iwagakure, are you going to use the evil god cult spell mastered by Hidden to kill the Raikage? On the vast and broken battlefield of Kumoming City, all the people who gathered because of Uchiha Chi were now standing in front of the crumbling ruins of the castle tower. Standing in front of Uchiha Chi were Jiraiya, Yohiko, Nagato, Konan, and Madarumi, who had captured the four-tails Jinchuriki, Laozi. Mabu Ai, the young secretary who was temporarily in charge of the remnants of Kumagakure, was tied up at his feet with the ropes he found from Sasori. Off to the side, Sasori was dismantling the giant chakra cannon seized from Kumagakure and seemed to have no interest in the conversation happening here. Maingetsu, who was exhausted and limp, supported Engo Miyashiro, who had fainted after being unable to move by a blow from the third Raikage, and slumped down beside a raised stone wall to rest. Farther away, the remnants of the defeated Kumagakure army gathered and watched the action from afar, but no one dared to leap the second wall and advance a single step. Smoke billowed upward, filling the gloomy sky with a thick, dark hue. Vultures and crows fluttered and circled from the sky, hesitant to land. Everyone was discussing and sharing the crucial intelligence on the current situation, gathered primarily by Nagato. At this moment, Nagato's words, informed by the Rinnegan Six-Path's human path ability, revealed the intelligence read from the minds of Iwagakure's Taoshi and the four-tails Jinchuriki. Old Shizuku revealed that the Iwagakure army was launching a surprise attack on the Land of Lightning and was already approaching Kumagakure. And the trump card Iwagakure had prepared for this was Uchiha Chi's weakling, barely a genin, Hidden. Iwagakure is going to use the Hidden curse to kill the Raikage, and the army will destroy the Kumagakure village, and force the daimyo of the Land of Lightning who is hiding in the Kumagakure village to sign a humiliating treaty. The combination of immortality and the evil cult spells is indeed a very tricky tactic, leading his reunited disciples, supported by Konan. Jiraiya frowned and analyzed. Theoretically, this technique, which directly affects the body and ignores defense, does have the potential to defeat the strong with the weak and kill the third Raikage. Immortality had long been a secret thanks to Uchiha Chi. Not only had outsiders researched and devised methods to counter it, but even within Konoha, there were numerous analyses of this ability, including the evil cult spells that had appeared in the Land of Hot Water. Without immortality, spells could only damage non-vital areas of the body, achieving the tactical goal of holding the enemy back, as was the case with the evil cult squad Uchiha Chi encountered in the Land of Hot Water. However, once immortality was achieved, the potential of this technique would be greatly increased. However, Uchiha Chi shook his head grimly. No, only someone who had truly fought the third Raikage could understand the magnitude of that monster's numbers. Furthermore, he had now conquered the seven-tailed Shigeaki with brutal force, possessing the tailed beast's powerful self-healing abilities. This kind of method won't defeat the third Raikage. Even more worrying for Uchiha Chi was that Hidden, now unlike the man in the original story, had fallen into madness, confusing pain with pleasure. It was actually him who had ultimately appeased the evil god through the evil god cult's sacrificial ritual, and Hidden's immortality had been passed down through two different hands, so it was hard to predict any flaws at this point. And as a normal person, there's a limit to how much pain one can endure. Thinking of this, Uchiha Chi couldn't help but feel a surge of anxiety. Off to the side, Madarumi observed his expression, but glanced at the sackclothed figure bound to the ground and sighed helplessly. She offered solace. After all, Hidden possesses immortality. If this method doesn't work, and Hidden himself lacks the ability to resist the Raikage, Iwagakure will likely employ other tactics for tactical reasons. She gave a dry laugh, but her lips trembled as she finished. The third Tsuchika Jinoki leads an army of 10,000 men, hundreds of genin, and the five-tails Jinchuriki. He wouldn't rely on torturing a child to fight the third Raikage, would he? Yohiko stepped forward, glanced around, and spoke in a deep voice, but there's no point in saying this now. From here to the hidden cloud village in the central mountains of the land of lightning, even at full ninja speed, it would take at least an hour. He pointed at the sackclothed figure bound to the ground. The only one among us who can withstand the rips of the Tensou Jutsu is Uchiha Chi, but he can no longer perform the Tensou Jutsu. By the time we arrive at the battlefield, the battle over there will probably be over, and what's more important than that, Yohiko stepped forward again and said solemnly, "Everyone, now is a perfect time to end the Third Shinobi World War. Just as Madarumi just analyzed, the loser of the Third Shinobi World War has appeared. Gather the power of Konoha and Kurigakure to clamp down on Iwagakure and force the other side back. Then the three countries will jointly divide the land of lightning." According to teacher Jiraiya's analysis, the third Hokage is probably very willing to exchange peace for the price of not seeking results in the land of lightning. There is no need to continue the war. Iwagakure and Kurigakure, as beneficiaries, also need to digest this fruit, and this has bought us precious time to resolve the civil strife in the land of water and seize power in the land of water. Hearing this, everyone's face couldn't help but stern, except Uchiha Chi, who frowned hard. Then, Yohiko took out the special-shaped kunai that Jiraiya had given him from his sleeve. He turned his head and looked at Uchiha Chi. He took a deep breath and said with some difficulty, "Uchiha Chi, I hope to let Jiraiya's disciple, Namikaze Minato, to help us accomplish this great cause. We need to gather forces. For Konoha, Jiraiya's toad can deliver the message, and for Kurigakure, the only one who can reach Kurigakure at a very fast speed and act as an envoy to persuade the Kurigakure elders to dispatch troops is Namikaze Minato. Of course, with Namikaze Minato's speed, he can also take you to the battlefield of Iwagakure within an hour, but if we do that, we will miss the best opportunity to end the war." He gritted his teeth slightly, looked at Uchiha Chi, and then slowly said, "I have never seen the child named Hidden, but I know that as long as the war continues, there will always be countless children like me, Nagato, Konan, and Hidden." Yohiko threaded his index finger through the tail ring of a kunai, dangling it upside down before Uchiha Chi. He spoke gravely, "What choice? Save your little brother, the child named Hidden, or end this war yourself, the fate of the Third Shinobi World War, your choice." The moment his words fell, the surroundings suddenly became pin-drop quietly silent. Everyone turned their gazes toward Uchiha Chi and the kunai before him. Even Scorpion, fiddling with the components of his chakra cannon, raised his head, his lips curled, watching the scene with amusement. And now, completely bewildered, he had no idea why now was the chance to end the war, or why he suddenly had to choose between saving one person or countless others. Staring at the kunai before him, Uchiha Chi stared blankly, his eyes wide open. He thought, this world, truly absurd. Chapter 377, Parting Ways, Communicating with Spirits in the Snake's Belly. Should he save his younger brother, Hidden, or the millions of people who had suffered in this war? The weight of life was weighed on the scales at that moment, like a passing train, quietly stirring up a gust of fate, slapping down heavily. But this question lingered in Uchiha Chi's impoverished brain for less than half a second before he raised his hand, reaching for the kunai held by Yohiko. Jiraiya, supported by Konan, watched the scene, his eyes widening slightly as if with a premonition. With an awkward expression on his face, he looked at Nagato and Konan, who remained silent. Just as Uchiha Chi's palm was about to reach for the kunai stretched out in Yohiko's hand, a pale hand reached out and grasped his wrist. Uchiha Chi raised his head slightly and looked at Nagato, who appeared in front of him. His expression quickly changed from slight surprise to a slight frown, until his brows fell heavily and he looked at him coldly. Anything else? Nagato was silent for a while and exhaled. Uchiha Chi, since our first meeting in the land of rain, we have always believed that you would bring peace to this world, so we came all the way from the land of rain. You should understand the weight of the choice you are making now. Once Iwagakure completes its established mission objectives, and we fail to intercept them in time, forcing their large forces to withdraw from the land of lightning, thereby achieving great results, then, this war that stretches across the entire world. There is no telling when it will end. Uchiha Chi looked at him calmly, so calm that it was even a little indifferent. So, Hidden deserved to die. Under Uchiha Chi's indifferent inquiry, as if it had nothing to do with him, the expressions of Nagato, Yohiko, and even Konan, who was supporting Jiraiya from the back, all changed at the same time. So, Nagato's voice rose from low to high, and he gradually roared, his face flushed and then turned blue. Let Iwagakure swallow the fruits of Kumagakure's victory and further enhance their war potential, then who will suffer in the end? they will increase their investment in the war and launch a bigger war on the battlefield west of the ninja world. With a rain country as the core, they will expand the intensity of the war to the surrounding Kusa, Taki, and river countries. In the end, the only one who will swallow the bitter fruit of war will be our rain country. It's her home. Veins bulged on Nagato's temples, staring at Uchiha Chi, his face like a layer of frost. His eyes seemed to be spewing fire, and he shouted fiercely. Don't you understand yet? Uchiha Chi, we firmly believe that you can bring peace, but now you are going to bring us greater disasters. What a joke. Do you have to let us explain it clearly before you can understand? To save a kid with the same physique as you who will never die, or to save the whole world? Such a clear choice. What are you going to choose now? You, Nagato, Yohiko spoke calmly, hushing Nagato. Then, he looked up at Uchiha Chi. After a moment's silence, he sighed. Uchiha Chi, this Kyune was used by Jiraiya-sensei to save you from the battlefield. Whatever you choose, as an individual, as someone who cannot represent the lives of millions, I have no right to influence your decision. But I still hope you will consider it carefully. Uchiha Chi said nothing, simply shaking off Nagato's hand. He glanced around. The battlefield suddenly filled with a whiff of tension. Nagato, suppressed in anger, stared at him intently. Konan bit her lip, while the others frowned and stared at Uchiha Chi. After a moment's thought, they turned their gaze to Yohiko and the other two. The group surrounding him seemed to split into two, those who had been conquered, and those who hadn't. The gazes between the two sides grew increasingly dangerous, and the atmosphere of confrontation grew increasingly tense. Uchiha Chi narrowed his eyes slightly, looking past Yohiko and landing on Nagato behind him, or, more precisely, on Nagato's eyes. If time weren't so pressing, given the current situation, he wouldn't mind starting his subsequent plans early, prioritizing the necessary tasks before assassinating Uchiha Madara. And then, silently, a golden flash appeared between the two men. Am I too late? A slightly naive voice rang out, and a blond young man suddenly appeared and landed. With one hand, he brushed Yohiko's Kyune away, then knelt halfway to the ground. His other hand reached out to his side, forming the no seal with his sword finger raised. What a dashing entrance. However, no one paid him any attention. Minato Namikaze looked up in bewilderment, wondering why no one reacted to such a dashing entrance. He scratched his head, glancing at the two opposing forces. But before he could finish his words, a small white snake suddenly emerged from the ground. It slithered along Uchiha Chi's legs and slithered to his shoulder, wrapping its tail around his left arm. Its head thrust forward, pressing against Uchiha Chi's ear. It suddenly opened its mouth, hissing and emitting a meaningless sound like a snake telephone. Uchiha Chi, possessing the gift of sage transformation, and the ability to communicate with all things in nature, immediately understood what the little white snake, or Orochimaru, was saying to him. After the brief incident, Uchiha Chi raised his head and looked indifferently at Yohiko and the other two without saying much. He just reached out and tore off the zero ring from his right thumb, which symbolized 0-0 and represented the identity of the leader of the Akatsuki organization. He threw it to the ground and threw it in front of the three people. It rolled on the rock surface and landed on the ground with a clang. Then, he calmly looked at the three people and said calmly, perhaps you three have misunderstood something from the beginning. I'm sorry, I've never been a savior, nor can I save everyone. All I ask is that those I care about live well. As for you, even if you've worked hard this time, I allow you to put aside your arrogance that disgusts me and kneel down to beg Minato for help. Then, Uchiha Chi looked indifferently at Nagato, who looked like he was suppressing his anger, at his Rinnegan eyes with strange patterns. Nagato, I'll give you two choices, destroy those eyes yourself, or I'll dig them out. That's not something you're worthy of mastering. With that, Uchiha Chi glanced around at the stunned expressions of the crowd and sneered. The next moment, he raised his right hand and formed a way seal. Bang! A cloud of white mist suddenly rose up. When the smoke dissipated, everyone realized with shock that Uchiha Chi had disappeared from their sight. Only Jiraiya and Minato, the two masters and apprentices who knew something about this technique, noticed something. Is this a reverse summoning technique? Someone summoned the spirit away. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 378, The poisonous snake occupies the magpie's lair, and the snake's questioning. In the land of lightning, in the central mountains, the hidden cloud village, panic reigned within the hidden cloud village. Nearly 10,000 ninja troops had been withdrawn to assassinate Uchiha Chi in Kumo City, leaving behind only a handful of the elderly, women, and children, along with a small garrison. Now, facing the mighty force of 10,000 men dispatched by Iwagakure, the hidden cloud village felt as if the sky were about to collapse. Standing there in a daze, each one looking up in bewilderment, their whole bodies trembling. And just then, bang, the hidden cloud village ninja defenders had just gathered in front of the village when a sudden, loud bang was heard behind them. The sound emanated from the center of the village, where the Hokage building stood. Turning back, they saw a massive purple snake emerged from the ground, coiling and clinging to the base of the Hokage building. It raised its head and roared, hiss, then, it slammed into the Hokage building, unleashing a dramatic dust storm and raging wind. That's Orochimaru's summoning beast, Manda. Beholding this despairing scene that seemed to add insult to injury, the Kumagakure ninjas on the platform in front of the gathering area were thrown into chaos. Damn it, that guy actually took advantage of our weakness and sneaked into our village again. It's over. It's over. There's Iwagakure in front, Orochimaru behind, and why aren't Hokage-sama and Abi-sama here? Is it possible that our Kumagakure is doomed? Don't give up hope. Wait, Ali, what are you doing? Don't jump. When his vision cleared again, Uchiha Chi felt as if he had fallen into a swamp. From somewhere, a faint sound of flowing water echoed. Through the deep darkness, he could vaguely see a sticky, crimson wall of flesh. This was the same level as the toad mouth binding technique of the Iwajuku toad of Mayaba Kurayama, belonging to the Raichi Cave ninja technique, snake mouth binding. As if Orochimaru had reversed his spiritual power and transported him to the stomach of a giant snake, Uchiha Chi briefly surveyed his surroundings, closing his eyes slightly. When he opened them again, a smear of purple shadow appeared around his eyes. At the same moment, the light in front of him suddenly brightened. Through his sage-like night vision, Uchiha Chi could see a faintly glowing door at the end of the winding snake's cavity. Is that it? The secret base Orochimaru has established near the hidden cloud village. How many bases does this guy have? Uchiha Chi grumbled, shook his head, and strode forward. Soon, he arrived at the yawning door. He turned the doorknob and pushed it open. The scene before him was nothing like the dark, damp, mossy, and wild laboratory environment Uchiha Chi had imagined. It was a bright, circular room, dotted with floor-to-ceiling windows that took up half the room. From the window, one could gaze down upon the entire Kumagakure village. A large desk sat in the center. A pale, black-haired man with heterochromatic eyes sat before the desk, legs crossed, one elbow resting on the chair back, one arm grasping his face. Hey, you're here, my disciple. This was undoubtedly the Hokage's office, and the one now occupying his position was his own ill-fated master. Orochimaru-sensei. Uchiha Chi's lips twitched at the sight. While he had been prepared for Orochimaru's immense powers and suspected he could establish a base right under Kumagakure's nose, considering he'd been here more than once, he still found this reverse summoning him right from the Hokage's office. Uchiha Chi found it a bit outrageous. Uchiha Chi's attention quickly shifted to Orochimaru's eyes. Orochimaru, too, was staring at him, veins bulging around his right eye. Nestled within Orochimaru's right eye socket was a single white eye. A Byakugan. Back in Yunming City, Uchiha Chi had noticed that Hazuki Mainjutsu's blinded left eye had been replaced with a Byakugan. He speculated that this might be a trophy obtained by Midorumi and her team during their attack on the chakra cannon. In other words, a member of the Hyuga clan had been caught up in this battle and died without Uchiha Chi's knowledge, losing his Byakugan, which was no longer caged. And now, Orochimaru possessed the other right eye. So, the presence of members of the Hyuga clan in this war was likely driven by Orochimaru. Indeed, is this the sage's heart you cultivated on Kame Island? Tisk, tisk, it can store such a vast amount of natural energy, truly astonishing. Staring at the terrifying thing throbbing in Uchiha Chi's chest with his Byakugan eyes, Orochimaru exclaimed in amazement. To understand all truths, to combine, create, and transcend countless ninjutsu, to learn and utilize every ninjutsu in the world, and ultimately become the ultimate individual. See, you're getting closer and closer to my dream. Despite receiving praise from his teacher, Uchiha Chi had no desire to discuss his dreams with Orochimaru. He simply shook his head. Teacher Orochimaru, Is there anything else you want to say? He looked past Orochimaru and gazed out the floor-to-ceiling window. From here, he could clearly see the entirety of Kumagakure, including the area in front of it. At this moment, lightning struck from the sky. The third Hokage, Ai, suddenly leaped down, his 7 tails swaying. Then, panting heavily, he dragged his body, severely wounded by Uchiha Chi, and began to charge at the densely packed Iwagakure army. His 7 massive tails swept across the battlefield, stirring up a bloody rain like a windmill. At this time, Orochimaru also turned his seat, looked at the hellish scene outside the window, and curled up the corners of his mouth slightly. Then, he turned his head and looked at Uchiha Chi, and said with a hoarse laugh, "The chakra at half of the 8 tails in your body is almost used up. The natural energy stored in a sage's heart has reached its limit after the battle with the Hokage and the use of that form of power twice in a row. Although the newly acquired ability of the cursed seal I can repair the body, it cannot repair the seal engraved in your heart. In other words, you can't use the move you used against the Hokage again. You stayed in Yunming City and listened to the plan discussed by the 3 brats of Akatsuki, and let Minato and Jiraiya take action. There was a considerable possibility that this war could be ended, and now you still chose to come here." Then, Orochimaru closed his right eye, narrowed his golden snake pupil slightly, and asked with interest, "Having made this choice, how are you going to fight against the Iwagakure army of 10,000 people?" Chapter 379, Susanna's Spiritual Power, Genuine Horn. Listening to Orochimaru's questioning, Uchiha Chi fell silent. Subconsciously, he slightly widened his right eye. It silently turned a crimson. 3 pitch-black Magatama beads swirled and linked, forming a black ring above the pupil. Within the black ring, from the center of the pupil, 8 petals, resembling the petals of a mandala, blossomed. This was Uchiha Chi's Mangekyo, a single-eyed Mangekyo. The power and destiny of Susanoo, awakened to divine power, is known as spiritual power. Infused with immense amounts of natural energy, the Mangekyo Sharingan transforms into another golden black form, resembling a frenzied demonic dance, as shown in Chapter 373, adding another layer of effect to the Dojutsu. This Mangekyo Sharingan Dojutsu, a level of bloodline-removing magic, became a level of dreadful magic. But even with such power, facing an army of tens of thousands, with both chakra and natural energy nearing depletion, it remained a question whether Uchiha Chi's eye power could sustain him in breaking through the enemy and rescuing Hidden. After a brief exploration, Uchiha Chi discovered that while this eye technique partially compensated for the loss of eye power, it still consumed a significant amount of chakra. While there were methods like recell attraction, it was completely different from the chakra extraction that Uchiha Madara used, which was similar to the Rinnegan ability. Recell attraction focused more on repairing the body and was less effective at absorbing chakra. The most pressing issue facing Uchiha Chi remained his chakra reserves. With all the techniques and fighting styles he had created, even using the tailed beasts as fuel was simply not enough. To solve this problem, one must either evolve their eyes to the level of eternal Mangekyo, like Uchiha Madara's. Upon reaching that level, the Uchiha clan members' base chakra reserves would be significantly increased, allowing them to unleash their full Susanoo form at will, making chakra practically free. Alternatively, one could capture a tailed beast, or an animal like the white snake sage, possessing vast quantities of Senjutsu chakra, and drain their power to compensate. But just now, in a moment of haste, they forgot to ask Minato, a master of sealing techniques, to help unseal the 4 tails from old Murasaki's body. Then, through beatings, they forced the 4 tails into a humiliating summoning contract, transforming it into a gorilla slave. There was no way back now, and it was even more difficult to capture a tailed beast on the spot to use as a power bank. Without chakra, let alone a powerful Susanoo, Uchiha Chi probably wouldn't even be able to lift a Susanoo skeleton. It was only with Orochimaru's sudden question that Uchiha Chi realized, with embarrassment, that this was all wrong. Uchiha Chi, you're so arrogant after just defeating the 3rd Hokage? If we just charge in like that, wouldn't that be serving food to that old man Inoki? Clenching his hands awkwardly, Uchiha Chi quietly retracted the Mangekyo in his right eye, then turned his head and glared at Orochimaru with a stern face. He said nothing, just stared. Orochimaru fell silent. You're not planning on just charging in like this without any preparation, are you? Yeah, he actually said yes, a perfectly self-assured yes. Orochimaru's pupils suddenly trembled, and he looked at Uchiha Chi with shock. Uchiha Chi, on the other hand, looked matter of fact. Even a little puzzled by Orochimaru's surprise. After all, the ninja world was so dangerous. In just 3 months, he had already experienced no fewer than 10 battles against cage-level warriors. If everyone really prepared, even a Yagura Karatechi would have to practice earth jutsu to counter water jutsu, from the basics to the form and properties. He hadn't even finished training yet, and with the intensity of these battles, he'd be lost. He always charged first and figured out a plan later. Orochimaru sighed, shook his head, and stood up. Forget it, follow me. With that, he leaped straight up, shattering the glass in the Raikage's office and plunging straight down the mountain. Uchiha Chi stared at the gap in the French window and wondered if the fourth Raikage's unique way of exiting the building had been learned from Orochimaru. After a moment's guess, Uchiha Chi made a decisive move, smashing another hole in the window with a clang, then leaped in right after Orochimaru. He leaped from the Raikage building, stepping on Manda's body. He followed Orochimaru a short distance and soon arrived at a canyon. Between the mountains ran a swamp. This was the spot where the hidden Cloud Village had subdued the previous generation's runaway Eight-Tails Jinchuriki. On the bank before the swamp stood a massive horn, supported by a solid wooden frame. It looked like a landmark for some tourist attraction. This is the original body of the Eight-Tails horn that was severed by the Raikage's son. It still contains some tailed beast chakra. Orochimaru brought Uchiha Chi to stay here, looking at the Eight-Tails horn and said lightly, the Eight-Tails Ushiki's original body died in Yunming City under your ninjutsu. This is the only tailed beast specimen in existence. In a few years, the Eight-Tails will probably be resurrected from this horn. This is why Kumagakure is confident in letting the Eight-Tails Jinchuriki go out. Uchiha Chi nodded suddenly. In other words, if this horn is taken away, Kumagakure will have lost this tailed beast. That's right. Orochimaru looked at the horn. However, you should be aware of the side effects of becoming a Jinchuriki, so this tailed beast chakra should be handled in the same way as before. After use, this part of the tissue must be extracted from the body in a timely manner. Orochimaru frowned again, and his words did not seem to be enthusiastic about becoming a tailed beast Jinchuriki. Otherwise, you will become the next generation of the Eight-Tails Jinchuriki. Becoming a Jinchuriki means being bound to the life of a tailed beast. The side effects of losing the Zero Tails nearly killed Uchiha Chi instantly, and the effects of a true tailed beast were likely more than Uchiha Chi could handle at this point. Furthermore, becoming the Eight-Tails Jinchuriki would first involve facing the resentful Eight-Tails Ushiki, who had personally killed the previous perfect Jinchuriki. Faced with the murder of its friend and enemy, its rebelliousness would likely be even greater than that of the Nine-Tails. While it could still be suppressed with a Sharingan, it was feared that it would suddenly appear and strike at a crucial moment during the execution of ever more important plans. Following Orochimaru's warning, Uchiha Chi could already imagine the consequences and nodded solemnly. Then, he took a deep breath and placed his palm on the horn of the eight-tailed Jayuki. Listen, the chakra in this horn has not been cultivated by me, only a small part of it. With this, you can perform the move that killed the eight-tailed. The 10,000-strong Iwagakure army that came this time is not on the same level as the troops used by Kumagakure to defend Kumoming City. The third Tsuchika Jinoki's dust release can ignore all defenses and kill with just a touch. After completing your goal, be sure to evacuate in time. Looking at Uchiha Chi, who was sealing the eight-tailed horn into his body, Orochimaru took a deep breath and solemnly instructed, "See, don't act on impulse. Everything is based on the 15th of July, the day when Ghost Festival arrives. When you will slay the snake and ascend to immortality, the power of a true immortal is far beyond your imagination." Uchiha Chi nodded seriously, closed his eyes, and sealed the eight-tailed horn with all his strength. Understood. Chapter 380, Hunting for the Seventh Tail, the Exchange Tactics. The avalanche of rocks, like a landslide, shattered into fragments in the blaze of the insect-eating cannon, raining down on the ground. "Hoo-ho," he gasped, feeling the strength surging from his body with his blood. Facing the seemingly endless figure charging forward, blood streamed down his forehead and into his eye sockets, saturating his vision with a hazy crimson. A hint of despair filled the third Raikage's eyes. But behind him lay his village, his brothers, and his family, whom he would protect to the bitter end, even at the cost of his life. For this, roar, with the utmost resolve and supreme will, he suppressed the beast within him that wreaked havoc, forcing his raging power throughout his body. He stood there and roared. Then, suddenly, the sizzling, dancing lightning turned from white to black, from black to red. His paws slammed into the ground, sending him hurtling out like an arrow. The two tails behind him condensed into giant palms, and he ran wildly on all fours with his legs, knocking over dozens of rock hermits along the way, and rushed straight through the army formation and leaped high into the air. His fierce gaze fixed directly on the military formation, floating in midair, an old man draped in green armor. The third Raikage's eyes burned with uncontrollable rage, and he roared to the millions, "Inoki, HMPH," observing the charging Raikage, both arms broken. Inoki floated in midair, motionless. "Did you lose both of those arms that made you famous fighting that Uchiha brat? You can't use hell thrust or four-handed kick." Inoki stared at the charging seven-tailed shadow, a touch of pity on his face. Then, "Raikage, your fate is sealed." Whoosh, the green armor was lifted, and violent steam rose from Inoki's back. A sturdy man, comparable in size to the Raikage, clashed his fists, and the steam armor he wore erupted in a blaze of steam, covering his body with a scarlet, ferocious coat of tailed beasts. Then, boom, a massive jet of air cracked the ground, leaving only a trail of scorching steam in its place. Like a dump truck barreling out, it instantly accelerated to supersonic speeds. A ferocious figure, five tails swaying, shot out. This was Iwagakure's five tails Jinchuriki, Han. Using the boiling release of steam, he possessed the most formidable physical force of all the tailed beasts. Bang! Just a body length away from Inoki, the five tails Han collided head-on with the on-rushing seven tails Raikage, unexpectedly knocking the third Raikage over and pinning him down, clinging to him like wrestling elephants. Then, three pairs of six air holes appeared behind him, and high-temperature steam erupted wildly, carrying the Raikage with him as he slammed into the encirclement of the Iwagakure ninjas behind him. At the same time, Inoki, floating in midair, clasped his hands together and looked solemnly at the third Raikage. As he opened his palms, a cube-emitting white light appeared between his palms. Dust release, original realm separation technique. On the other side, puff, he pierced his abdomen with a kunai, raised his palm and slammed it into it, drawing out a handful of blood. He smeared the final strokes of a circle and triangle formation on the ground. Standing in this ritual for the curse, death by blood, Hidden's face was grimacing with pain, his teeth chattering, staring intently at the third Raikage who was surrounded by the five-tailed man. "Haha, die? Die? Raikage, as long as you die, everything is over, my long-cherished wish, the peace of the land of hot springs, the countless souls you sacrificed for this, everyone can rest in peace." With a ferocious roar, Hidden raised his jet-black spear. In the eyes of the surrounding Iwagakure ninjas, who looked at him as if he were a monster, he aimed the tip of his spear at his heart. Puff, the iron spear pierced his back. The ritual was complete. At the same time, Inoki raised the cube he had created with his dust release technique and aimed it at the third Raikage, who had been knocked into the crowd. He hurled it straight down. This white cube, less than 3 inches in his palm, once unfolded, would be able to atomically separate all matter within a 4 square meter area. With Hidden's curse, even a slight delay in the third Raikage's speed would allow this ninjutsu to strike. Regardless of whether Hidden's curse killed the third Raikage or not, his dust release technique would disregard his strongest lightning release armor and melt him, armor and all, into slag. In an instant, the invisible curse attack, accompanied by the dust release technique, descended simultaneously. Though, a light, subtle sound echoed, and the small cube instantly expanded from its self-destruct point, obliterating everything within it. A 4 square meter square crater instantly appeared on the ground, its cross-section impossibly smooth. A moment of profound silence descended upon the field. Everyone held their breath, staring at the center. "Is he dead?" Inoki muttered to himself, then fixed his gaze on the impact point. But at that moment, an agonizing roar erupted from the nearby crowd of Iwagakure ninjas. 7 enormous scarlet tails swept across the ground like flagpoles, knocking back all the Iwagakure ninjas within a 10-meter radius. At the center, a misshapen creature, half-human, half-tailed beast, with a face resembling armor, a back like an insect shell, a mixture of blue and green, and 6 wings, stood in place, roaring to the heavens. From its origin, the rising wind formed a tangible column of wind. This was the ultimate limit of the fusion of human and tailed beast that an imperfect Jinchuriki could master, the seven-tailed possession. As Uchiha Chi had predicted, Hidden's attack on the heart was incapable of killing the third Raikage in this form. With his reflexes, the moment damage was inflicted, he could harness the power of the tailed beasts, partially transforming into a tailed beast, forcibly deflecting weak points and vital points. In extreme cases, such an action could even make the tailed beasts feel threatened by death, prompting them to act like the Nine Tails aided Uzumaki Naruto in the early stages, further enhancing their coordination. And with the third Raikage's extreme speed, after deflecting Hidden's attack on the heart, his dust release, seemingly fast but actually as slow as an old woman crossing the street in the eyes of a speedster, was completely incapable of hitting him. The only chance for dust release to strike the third Raikage was at the moment when the third Raikage attacked the third Tsuchikage. Inoki, determined to die together with his enemy, used his newly recovered Will of Stone to burn all his chakra and unleash his most powerful ultimate ninjutsu, the dust release, separation limit jutsu, which could even destroy 25 of Uchiha Madara's would release clones in an instant. But obviously, Inoki had no such intentions at the moment. Watching the third Raikage, who had instantly escaped the range of dust release's attack and appeared in the center of the Iwagakure army, a bloody hole appearing on his chest, his face filled with pain and ferocity, his expression suddenly changed. He immediately realized what the third Raikage was planning to do. Not good, he immediately shouted, "Hold the line. Quick, press forward. Han, beat him into the makeshift trap, that guy's trying to trade him." The words had barely fallen, and before the order could even be spread, on the other side, the third Raikage's eyes flashed fiercely. He crushed the ground with his paws, and from between his two broken elbows, two insect-like claws extended. As he leaned down, his two hind legs twisted and deformed strangely, their muscles surging. Like a flying insect, his hind legs shook the earth, and in an instant, he launched himself out, transforming into a blood-red bolt of lightning. He lunged straight at the area where the Iwagakure army was most concentrated. Mastering Cursed Jutsu and Dust Release, and protected by the Five Tails Jinchuriki, Inoki proved a formidable opponent, making it difficult to penetrate his defenses. The third Raikage, however, simply switched tactics and attacked the ordinary Iwagakure ninja, who were now vastly inferior to him. He sought to deplete the Iwagakure's forces as much as possible before exhausting his strength. This move, fueled by the endurance of the tailed beasts, meant that even with Inoki, the Tsuchikage, at the head of the Iwagakure, the third Raikage, also aided by the Seven Tails, was still likely to repeat the original story's fate of 3 days and 3 nights of fierce battle, ultimately succumbing to exhaustion. As Inoki sweated profusely as he pondered how to stop the third Raikage's actions, he watched the large Iwagakure ninja being repeatedly slammed back and forth by the third Raikage like a dump truck. Suddenly, he turned his head expressionlessly, his face fixed on Hidden, whose face was itched with pain as he plunged a jet-black spear into his heart. A sinister and vicious look suddenly appeared. Chapter 381 What is to Flame? Here they come, here they come. The sensory ninjas in the unit opened their eyes in horror, their cries drowned out by the sudden roar of thunder. A ferocious old man, scarred and ferocious like a monster, transformed into lightning, piercing like a javelin. Diversionary force. They only had time to call out the unit number that should be deployed before the bloody shadow of lightning shot in front of them, beheading the member of the sensory team who had spoken and smashing the vanguard's position, sending more than a dozen Iwagakure ninjas flying and tearing them apart. The blood rained down, still suffused with warm steam. At this moment, the Iwagakure ninjas, belatedly realizing the situation, sprang into action. Ninjutsu Squadron, rewrite the terrain. Squadron, rock cannons, rapid fire, earth style, earth and land return. Rock cannons, activated with simple hand seals, were unleashed from the center of the Iwagakure formation, blanketing the vast area in the Raikage's path like a hail of bullets. Then, ninjutsu after ninjutsu was unleashed by Iwagakure ninjas further back, earth and land return, earthquake core, and clay fall. Each jutsu, using predetermined attack patterns, caused the ground to sink, removing the opponent's footholds and creating vast cavities. A massive cloud of clay, descending from the sky, appeared above the cavities, descending and crushing the third Raikage, attempting to bury him in a deep pit. However, the series of attacks deployed by the Iwagakure ninjas were based on the Raikage's pre-ninja Jinchuriki skills. His most obvious characteristic as the Seven Tails Jinchuriki was his ability to fly. The straight bolt of lightning curved upward 6 times as it shot out, dodging most of the attacks. It spread its wings and leaped through each hole, finally crashing through the rising earthen wall and plunging straight into the crowd. Then, a slaughter that ordinary ninjas could not resist began. Impenetrable, elusive, forced to passively defend, yet completely unstoppable. The Iwagakure ninjas faced a scene of hell, but they had no choice but to swallow their saliva and roar, charging forward to fill the gap in their formation and usher in another round of death. Lord Tsuchikage, the Iwagakure of the intelligence squad, looked on with dread at the unstoppable lightning flash that was like a wolf among a flock of sheep. He turned to Inoki and called out urgently, "This is different from what we reported. The gap is simply too great. If this continues, it will become a seesaw battle, and once our casualties reach the limit, it's possible." Inoki frowned deeply and raised his hand to stop the intelligence squad leader from blurting out the bad news. He frowned, took a deep breath, turned his head and looked coldly at Hiden, who was surrounded by a group of Iwagakure not far behind him. At this moment, how could it be? How could it be that it didn't work? Enduring the extreme pain of the iron spear piercing his chest, Hiden bared his teeth, trembling and dazed as he looked at the third Hokage, who had been hit by the evil god's curse and endured the same pain as him, but seemed unaffected and continued to slaughter in the Iwagakure camp. Clearly the curse was successful. At this moment, the cold voice of the third Tsuchikage Inoki suddenly rang in Hiden's ears. "That's because, it's not painful enough, it's not cruel enough, that guy's will is far beyond your imagination. Do you think the war between ninjas is just a game of playing house? Listen, this is a battle of wills." Hearing this, Fidouin gritted his teeth, hissed in pain, and pulled out the black spear that was stuck in his chest. Then, he lowered his head, tightly grasped the spear, and stared at his thigh with trembling. "In that case, then I'll prove it to you." As soon as the words fell, Fidouin grasped the black spear in reverse, and was about to stab his thin black thigh. However, at this moment, a hand grasped the spear, stopping Hiden's movements. Iwagakure ninja Bunga, with 2 blue scars under his eyes, exhaled deeply and looked directly at him. "Hiden, don't you understand yet?" His face slightly furrowed, and he raised his other hand, pressing it on Hiden's forehead. He said coldly, "Lord Tsuchikage said, you're not cruel enough, and you're not hurting enough." As soon as the words fell, from where Bunga's palm had pressed on Hiden's forehead, black sealing lines gradually expanded. The seal of self-binding curse. Once cast, strip-like patterns will continuously appear on the subject's body to restrain their movements, making them completely unable to move on their own. In the original work, this sealing technique was once used by Shimura Danzo to seal Uchiha Sasuke. As the lines of the sealing technique spread across Hiden's body, 4 towering shadows appeared before him, frozen in the center of the death god's blood formation. Hiden's heart trembled, a sudden sense of unease rising from his chest. You, what are you doing?" However, the 4 Iwagakure ninjas who stepped forward remained silent. Instead, they indifferently drew their black spears, aimed them at Hiden's limbs, and stabbed fiercely. Swish! 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 Broken hands, severed legs, pierced his heart, and ripped out his liver. The evil god's curse actually penetrated the strongest lightning armor, acting on the surface of the body, and caused damage to the third Hokage's body. Hiss, roar. The sudden and intense pain made even the third Hokage open his eyes wide and howl in agony. Good opportunity. Kill. Seeing this scene, the morale of the Iwagakure army was greatly boosted, and they immediately rushed forward. However, even with his limbs completely severed and his body resembling a human pig, the third Hokage was no match for ordinary Iwagakure. Amidst roars of pain, and the horrified gazes of countless Iwagakure ninjas swarming over him, the old man, his senseless limbs dangling and trembling, managed to stand, relying on 7 wildly dancing tails, like Dr. Octopus from Spider-Man. His gaze suddenly pierced the crowd, landing on Hiden, who was being tortured to the point of screaming in agony by 4 Iwagakure ninjas. The power of the curse belongs to that brat. Is it one of Uchiha's subordinates who are closely associated with him? Should we save him first? No. In this state, we can't. After a moment of thought, the third Hokage made a quick decision. His face darkened, and he glared at the Iwagakure ninjas. Lightning surged wildly from his body once again, and his entire body transformed into a monster, pushing the power of the 7 Tails transformation vessel to its fullest. As if realizing his own tragic end, the old man's eyes were filled with determination. Roar, like a moth to a flame, he roared and threw himself into the fire. Chapter 382, Rage. Kaleidoscope appears. It worked, but, looking at the ferocious figure, his limbs severed yet still able to use his tail as a limb, wreaking havoc among the Iwagakure army, Inoki's face darkened. Undoubtedly, the evil cult's curse, as he had anticipated, had penetrated the lightning release armor and damaged the third Hokage. Normally, a normal third Hokage would have collapsed, a prey to prey. However, the third Hokage's becoming the Seven Tails Jinchuriki was something he hadn't anticipated. Thanks to his Seven Tails transformation into possession, even with his limbs severed, the third Hokage, using his tail as limbs, could maintain the immense penetrating power and unpredictable speed of his human form. In this form, the third Hokage was even more formidable than the fully formed Seven Tails. The only way to stop the Iwagakure ninja army from charging forward was to force them to fully transform into tailed beasts. Slowing them down would allow their attacks to directly impact the tailed beasts, ultimately killing the third Hokage. And the method for forcing the Hokage to fully transform into a tailed beast, Inoki suddenly turned, once again sternly gazing at hidden behind him. He opened his palms, and a white cube appeared within them, swirling. At that moment, looking at Inoki performing the dust release, separation of the original world technique, looking at the white cube that even the immortal couldn't resist, haha, panting like a bull in pain, a ferocious expression on his face, Hidden raised his head slightly. A dull look flashed across his eyes, as if he had already realized his fate. Hidden practically bit his lip, his teeth grinding with hatred until they made a strange sound. He angrily demanded of the third Tsuchikage Inoki, "Tsuchikage, is that your final answer?" "Yes." Inoki calmly looked at Hidden, at this child who was still as small as a carrot, and said coldly, "If you want to achieve revenge against a great power, you should have had this awareness long ago. To defend a great power with a small country is to gamble your life on the table. Now, with just your life, you can exchange for a huge victory. What else can you complain about?" Hearing this, Hidden laughed bitterly to himself. At this point, he couldn't understand why the original intention of pursuing peace had degenerated into blind revenge. Why, in the pursuit of revenge, would he trust the very person he was supposed to be avenged? He had wasted time and endured pain for such a goal, but it would all ultimately end in vain. But now, the answer seemed to be fading further and further away. At the end of his rope, like a drowning man grasping at a straw, Hidden stared at the third Tsuchikage, Inoki, with resentment and anger, demanding through gritted teeth, "Let me die knowingly, I ask you, Tsuchikage, will my death bring peace to the land of hot water?" Hearing this question, and seeing the resentful expression on the face of the young child fighting for a nation, Inoki remained silent. If the land of lightning had been struck, the next step would naturally be a two-front war, forcing the land of fire to cede territory. And how could peace be achieved in the land of hot water, wedged between Konoha and Kumagakure? Looking at the extremely innocent Fiden who had inherited the will from someone, his dead heart seemed to be pricked by a needle, reminding him of the stone he had thrown away 40 years ago and the heart he had discarded since then. Then, an embarrassing rage rushed to Inoki's forehead, making his eyebrows and beard stand up. "Kid, this is war," as if to comfort himself and answer Hidden's question, but also as if he could not give a proper answer to justify his despicable behavior, he frowned and shouted coldly, "This is war, any means necessary, no matter what. For this, I even paid the life of my own child." At this point, you little brat still claim that you are fighting for the so-called peace, the so-called ideals. You are angry and full of hatred. After fighting until now, do you think you are the only one who hates? Do you think that with your naive ideas, you can end the ugly chain of hatred in this world? Inoki could not calm down. His voice rose from low to high and gradually roared, his face flushed and then turned blue. "You are wrong. Meaningless ideals will sooner or later collapse in the face of reality, and in this world, only hatred can be inherited forever, whether it is you, me, or everyone living in this world. Ninja, they are creatures who sleep soundly with gnashing hatred, yet endure deep humiliation to pursue justice." Inoki's face darkened as he spoke, and he suddenly aimed a pure white dust release cube in his hand at Hidden, who was immobilized by the sealing technique. "For this, I am willing to endure everything." However, at that moment, "You're right," a roar of fury suddenly erupted from the front of the army. "You're right, Inoki." Like a thunderclap, the ground cracked open. From the earth, a massive azure snake opened its maw, and from it leaped a battle-scarred figure, clad in Uchiha attire stained with numerous holes and blood. As he absorbed the eight-tailed horn, he felt a stabbing force piercing his heart. Although his defenses remained intact, Uchiha Chi, sensing something was amiss, immediately chose to carry the eight-tailed horn while sealing it, heading towards the battlefield where a sense of foreboding loomed. As soon as he arrived at the battlefield, The Iwagakure clan began inflicting the uttermost torture on their youngest brother, breaking his hands, severing his legs, piercing his heart, and ripping out his liver. Enduring the agony to repair the wounds that pierced his body, Uchiha Chi emerged from the ground and onto the battlefield. The first thing he saw was this scene. He watched his youngest brother being tortured to death. He watched the third Hokage roaring in grief and despair in the distance, his final moments approaching. He watched the third Hokage, not satisfied with what was happening right now, even resorting to dust release to kill his own youngest brother. Hatred spread like wildfire. In an instant, all thoughts of dwindling chakra and natural energy, of retreating from the battlefield upon achieving his goal, and of the power of a sage that could be envisioned by waiting for the future, were completely forgotten. Standing before the 10,000-strong Iwagakure army, Uchiha Chi's face twisted horribly, veins bulging across his forehead and around his eyes. He glared fiercely at Inoki, who was about to unleash his dust release. His eyes instantly stained a crimson red. Infused with a vast influx of natural energy, his right eye quietly turned to pitch-black darkness. 8 twisted golden petals, like petals rising from the mud, danced wildly, imprinting themselves upon the sun. Without hesitation, Uchiha Chi immediately activated his forbidden eye, which would lead to blindness upon its initial activation. Then, a blazing pillar of flame rose from the ground around him, reaching the heavens. The entire gloomy sky seemed to be drawn in, swirling around the fiery pillar. Boom, blue lightning roared, tearing the sky apart. A divine thunder beast that was even larger, more majestic, and more magnificent than the complete form of the tailed beast poked its head out from the dark clouds, and instantly condensed an attack towards Inoki that exceeded the speed of sound and could land in 1,000th of a second. Chapter 383 Mythical Projection 10-Fist Sword. Is that lightning release, Kirin? Amidst the gathering clouds, a plain surrounded by mountains, Inoki was startled by a sudden movement just as he was about to unleash his dust release. He instinctively looked up and saw blue lightning streaking across the sky. Lightning emanating from the clouds within kilometers converged at an incredibly violent speed. Then, it fell instantly. Seeing this, Inoki couldn't care less about using dust release to kill hidden or severely injure the Hokage, forcing him to fully transform into a tailed beast. This move had a range large enough to encompass his central army and severely injure hundreds of Iwagakure ninjas. He could only open his palm and raise it toward the sky. A white beam of light suddenly rose from his palm, colliding with the falling thunder. Two extremely terrifying forces collided, yet no massive explosion like a traditional wave collision would have occurred. Even the S-rank ninjutsu, lightning release, Kirin, was completely powerless against the bloodline's ability to disintegrate everything into its atomic state. A pillar of light pierced the sky, slicing through the clouds and wiping out the thunderbolts. However, Uchiha Chi had achieved his goal. Using his Thunder God Sword, Butsu Amagado, to summon the heavenly thunder, he launched a massive offensive against Iwagakure at top speed, forcing Inoki to abandon his quest for hidden. In those brief seconds, a pillar of light rose from behind Uchiha Chi, gradually expanding. 26 bones, a hue ranging from bright yellow to crimson, emerged from the light. A half-skeletal Susanoo quickly took shape in the flames. Then, flesh coalesced, fascia rose, and armor was draped over it. Infused with the terrifying power of the Mangekyo Sharingan, Susanoo rapidly leaped from its first form, a skeleton, to its second, a half-skeleton, to its third, a flesh and blood giant with long legs, reaching its fourth form. This Susanoo, with the addition of Karasu Tengu's armor, significantly boosted its defenses, transforming into the Susanoo sword with an immense attack range. Furthermore, in this form, it could be attached to the tailed beasts as armor, unleashing the full power of Power Susanoo. This was a supremely powerful Susanoo capable only of the eternal Mangekyo Sharingan. Yet, now, it had been summoned by Uchiha Chi with his single-eyed Mangekyo. What the hell is that thing? Damn it, it's too high. Like a mountain, almost a mountain range rose from thin air before the eyes of the tens of thousands of Iwagakure ninjas. Standing 120 meters tall, crimson and clad in blazing armor, it resembled a giant Susanoo, a flaming mountain, appearing from thin air above the earth. However, this wasn't the end yet. Floating within Susanoo, Uchiha Chi furiously opened his right eye, and within it, 8 mandala-like petals danced wildly from the sludge-like background. A vast amount of natural energy, drawn from the sage's heart and the blood vessels surrounding his eye, converged frantically, showering Susanoo with blessings. From Susanoo's armor, dark, twisted lines gradually emerged, merging with the armor like inscriptions, imbuing the entire Susanoo with the power of a sage. This wasn't the curse seal Susanoo, performed by Uchiha Sasuke and Jugo in the future, but something only Uchiha Chi could unleash, Sage Mode Susanoo. At this moment, staring at this terrifying creature before his eyes, it would take over 70 people standing on top of each other like an Indian stuntman to reach that height. Standing at its base, one could only look up to their waists. The entire place suddenly fell utterly silent, with only the heavy, rapid breathing of countless people. A power transcending generations reappeared in the world, but now the vast majority of the Iwagakure shinobi were armed with only kunai and shurikens that couldn't even tickle their opponents. A despairing chasm of power lay before them. Each Iwagakure ninja gaped in disbelief, staring at the mountain-like armored giant with pale faces and incoherent speech. Aren't we going to fight something like this? How can we possibly defeat this? Why? Aren't we fighting Kumagakure? Where the hell did this thing come from? And at that moment, Inoki, floating in mid-air like a small potato, fell silent. Yes, they were here to pick Kumagakure's peaches. He had brought 10,000 people here to surround and kill the third Hokage, AI. But now, what the hell was they surrounding? Gazing upon this force, even more immense and terrifying than the one he remembered, reappearing before his eyes, Inoki suddenly recalled 40 years ago. On that day, just like now, he had stood before this terrifying being, too powerful to dare raise the slightest thought of resistance, his will utterly shattered by that being who also bore the surname Uchiha. Now, at that very moment, it felt like that very moment. Inoki suddenly stretched out his hand, looking at his own aged form and wrinkled palm. A startled awakening came over him, a cold sweat already breaking out on his back. The moment this being reappeared, he realized, if he couldn't kill Uchiha Chi today, one day, the entire world would become the plaything of that clan. Then, Inoki's expression suddenly turned ferocious, the wrinkles on his face like stretched ropes, his furious glare like two sharp swords. Now, it's different. The me of today is nothing like the me of the past. Inoki instantly gave up on killing Hiden, gave up on killing the Hokage, and abandoned all his plans. Roaring, he charged towards the mountain like Susanoo. Today is the time to exact revenge for the humiliation bestowed upon me, Uchiha. A fierce white light condensed in his palm, and Inoki stared intently at Uchiha Chi within the Susanoo. Prior to this, the Iwagakure had a comprehensive plan to target either side of the Battle of Kumamura Castle, regardless of which side emerged victorious and reached Kumagakure. Unexpectedly, neither side survived the battle, but both reached the frontier of Kumagakure. But now, there was no time to worry about the third Hokage. As Inoki roared and charged towards Uchiha Chi, the Iwagakure's war plan was instantly rewritten. Without the slightest hesitation, upon seeing Inoki's movements, the five-tailed Jinchuriki guarding him immediately unleashed their full-tailed beast transformation. 5 massive tails swelled wildly, and a 4-horned demonic beast with a pure white body, resembling a dolphin and a horse, thundered down into the world. Galloping across the earth, endless steam simmered within its body, its furnace forging immense power. The colossal beast, over 70 meters tall, charged headfirst into the armored giant's waist. Boom! The immense force sent the armored giant flying hundreds of meters away. With a single palm, it carved a gully 10 meters wide and several hundred meters long into the ground, halting its charge in a panic. Meanwhile, Uchiha Chi, floating in Susanoo and gradually adapting to the vast power before him, let out a long sigh. Then, he suddenly raised his gaze, gazing at the 5-tailed beast before him. To deal with Inoki, he must first destroy it. Uchiha Chi's eyes suddenly turned cold, and he shouted indifferently, "You beast, don't worry, I'll find you a cage." As soon as he finished speaking, Uchiha Chi suddenly raised his palm, and the 8 twisted petals of his right eye spun wildly. The 120-meter-tall armored Susanoo giant then raised his palm with a roar, as if to take over the entire sky, as if to ask the heavens for something. As the armored Susanoo giant spread his 5 fingers, the clouds that gathered and swirled above the sky suddenly burst open. From the hollow in the sky, a brilliant red light suddenly bloomed, and then transformed into a mysterious red spiritual light, descending towards the center of the armored Susanoo's palm. Faintly, it could be seen that it was an illusory, cord-like object. Chapter 384, Immortal Susanoo, Earth Dust Storm. In the Kajiki, Chapter of the Hayabusa Susanoo. After being driven from Takamagahara, Susanoo arrived at a place called Toriha, on the high river in Izumo province. There, Susanoo, seeking justice, slew the Yamada no Orochi, Greek, with his Tenkan sword. In the ninja world, there also existed a Tenkan sword, the same sword that slew the Yamada no Orochi. This sword was later found and possessed by Uchiha Itachi. This spiritual sword, shaped like a gourd, lacks substance. Liquor ejected from the gourd transforms into a sword, trapping those it strikes within the gourd and sealing them in a dreamlike world. It was a Kusanagi sword, endowed with the power to seal. At this moment, Uchiha Chi's right eye, the main Gekyo Sharingan, wielded the eye technique spiritual power. Its ability was to reflect mythology through the mind, channeling it within the body and granting mythical strength. This eye technique, a reflection of ultimate power, could project three distinct divine powers from the mythical Susanoo. The first one was the ability to seal everything. Mythical projection, 10-fist sword, the red light that pierced the sky fell into the palm of the armored Susanoo giant, transforming into a gourd-like handle. What is that thing? Looking at the thing that Uchiha Chi summoned from the sky, Inoki felt something was wrong, but for a moment he had no idea what it was. In line with the plan of a quick victory, he turned around and frowned at Han, who had transformed into the five tails below, and shouted, "Han, proceed according to the plan, knock him over. I'll cut off this thing's hands and feet and restrict its movements. Also, Perception Squad, report the location of that brat to me as soon as possible." The Susanoo, wrapped in flames, was different from the Susanoo of Uchiha Madara that he had seen. It had a certain effect of blocking vision. In addition, the armored Susanoo was too huge, a full 120 meters high. With such a large area, Inoki had no way of distinguishing where Uchiha Chi was hiding in the Susanoo. Without a targeted strike, chakra would simply be wasted. At this point in the battle, scheming was futile. The Iwagakure's plan was simple. First, they had to dismember the massive, target-like Susanoo, incapacitating Uchiha Chi and confining him within range. Inoki would then deliver the final blow. After all, compared to the third Hokage's hellish thrust, Inoki's dust release, when it could hit, truly became the ninja world's strongest spear. Plans and orders quickly spread throughout the Iwagakure army. With the Jinchuriki and Tsuchikage leading the charge, the Iwagakure ninjas, awed by the Susanoo Titan's true form, temporarily suppressed their fear and, like ants, quickly took their positions, following the previously agreed-upon plan. At the moment Uchiha Chi summoned the projection of the Tenkan sword from this world, the five-tailed king, transformed into the true form of the tailed beast, plowed the ground with his hind hooves after a blow, already preparing for the next charge, yet seemingly waiting for something. His first attack was intended to knock Uchiha Chi out of the formation, preventing him from attacking the ninja army with his massive form. With such a large size, a single Susanoo strike with an area of effect damage could have slain countless Iwagakure soldiers. The second attack was the ultimate kill. At that moment, the sky was thick with dark clouds. Thunder rumbled faintly, and the wind from the sky carried a sense of oppression, flowing through the 10,000-man formation. The Five Tails Jinchuriki, who had been waiting for a moment, caught a glimpse of an old man with white hair and beard, wearing a purple monk's robe and holding Buddhist beads, from the corner of his eye at the front of the army formation behind him. His eyes suddenly moved. At this moment, the true body of King Mu, who had completely transformed into a tail beast, accumulated power to perfection. He turned into a white shadow and rushed out, crashing straight into the armored Susanoo Titan. In response to this offensive, the 10,000-strong Iwagakure army split into nearly 100 different battalions of various sizes, and simultaneously charged towards the giant standing on the plain. Earth Style, Earthquake Core, Earth Style, Yellow Spring Swamp, Earth Style, Mountain and Earth Technique. Hundreds of ninjutsu suddenly roared at this moment, and the earth trembled and sank. The ground beneath the Susanoo Titan transformed into a vast swamp. At the edge of the swamp, the ground rose into a forest of rock spears dozens of meters long. Beyond, the ground was lifted up, splitting in two, pressing down on the giant in the center. However, facing this onslaught, Uchiha Chi, standing between Susanoo's brows, looked slightly downcast. But against such a formidable defense, the Iwagakure's offensive seemed laughable, like scratching an itch through a shoe. "So you call this Earth escape?" Looking down at the battlefield below, Uchiha Chi scoffed, his eyes wide, and shouted coldly, "Look! This is real Earth escape." The moment he finished speaking, The armored Susanoo Titan responded with a thud. Its soul slammed through the ridiculous, less than 10-meter deep earth escape, yellow spring swamp. It landed on solid ground, legs slightly bent. The entire Susanoo Titan swayed slightly to find its center of gravity, and then, like a bolt of lightning, it broke through the earth. Completely violating the laws of motion for a massive, heavy object, the entire Susanoo Titan leaped up like a crow taking to an airplane. The moment it landed with a thunderous thud, boom, the entire plane, along with the nearby central mountain range of the Land of Lightning, shook violently. Countless Iwagakure ninjas lost their balance and fell to the ground. Those who managed to stay on their feet, after a difficult swaying moment, saw a massive dust storm, stirred up by the immense weight of the falling object. Mixed with countless pieces of rubble, carried by immense inertia, it spread outward from the center and instantly descended upon them. Such a massive leap actually sent thousands of Iwagakure flying. At that moment, a brilliant white figure pierced the dust storm's smokescreen, its 5 enormous tails swaying rhythmically as it charged. Its limbs slammed into the ground, and with terrifying brute force, it charged headfirst into the armored Susanoo Titan. I didn't look for you, yet you came to me, ridiculous. Uchiha Chi couldn't help but sneer at the charging 5-tailed beast. Without making any other moves, the armored Susanoo Titan simply turned around, planted his feet on the ground, slightly bent his legs, and raised one hand with his fingers spread out. He was actually ready to capture the 5-tailed beast with one hand. After taking the blow from the 5 tails just now, Uchiha Chi had already tested the limits of his opponent's offensive power. The complete tailed beast transformation unleashed by his imperfect Jinchuriki was clearly unable to unleash the beast's true strength. Furthermore, the added benefit of Sage Mode on Susanoo was terrifying. Withstanding the opponent's full-strength attack, the armored Susanoo merely retreated, not even a crack forming. The true transformation of Susanoo with Uchiha Chi's special Sage Mode wasn't Sasuke's false Sage Mode, enhanced by Jugo's cursed seal, but rather an alternative Sage Mode powered solely by natural energy. This rapid extraction of vast amounts of natural energy, though brief in duration, evoked an ultimate power so pure and unpretentious that it frightened even Uchiha Chi himself. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 385, The Sword Seals the 5 Tails, and Shukaku appears. At this moment, the 5-tailed King Mu's true form lowered its head, its 5 sharp horns charging furiously at the armored Susanoo. Uchiha Chi's gaze fixed on the pure white beast before him. He raised one palm and clasped his fingers together. The Susanoo giant's palm thrust out with a bang, the jet-black immortal patterns on the armor tinging with heat, turning a bright red. A firm palm pressed down on King Mu's forehead. The two titans instantly collided, the collision of forces evoking a dull roar. Blocked, however, to the disbelief of countless Iwagakure, after pushing the Susanoo giant back dozens of meters, it actually stopped its retreat, preventing King Mu from advancing an inch. How could someone not possessing a fully formed Susanoo like Uchiha Madara actually wrestle against a 5-tailed king? While laymen watch the excitement, experts observe the details. Watching this scene, Inoki's eyes widened in shock. From the moment the battle began, the very first step of his plan had gone awry. This meant he couldn't push Susanoo into the massive crater created by the Earth-style seismic core, thus limiting the enemy's destructive power with the ninja army's combined ninjutsu. Before he could issue his next command, on the field, after single-handedly capturing the 5-tailed king, Uchiha Chi stared with wide eyes. The armored Susanoo Titan thrust forward, firmly grasping one of the king's horns. With his other hand, gripping the gourd's phantom, he struck down with a powerful blow. From the gourd's mouth, a flaming blade erupted like a dream. The 10-fist sword pierced downward, piercing the 5-tailed king's brow and exiting through his chin. Roar! The 5-tailed king let out a shrill howl. However, not here, using steam to change the temperature and falsify the source of chakra, within Susanoo, he carefully observed the tailed beast structure with his main Gekyo Sharingan and stabbed the chakra-gathering node with his Tenkan sword. This was the same technique Uchiha Setsuna used to separate Killer Bee, the 8-tails Jinchuriki. Uchiha Chi followed suit, but failed to strike the Jinchuriki within the tailed beast. He frowned slightly and snorted coldly, "Tisk, another information black hole, But whatever. Meanwhile, Han, the Jinchuriki within the five tails, suddenly broke out in a cold sweat. He perceived the portion of the tailed beast's body struck by the flaming sword as it vanished, transformed into chakra and absorbed into the gourd. If he hadn't been so accustomed to using this boiling escape technique to confuse the enemy's perception, he would have been completely destroyed by this unremarkable strike. But before he could be too happy, a clear and cold shot suddenly rang out from above his head, then change the target this time, and take out the big one directly. In an instant, an ominous premonition filled Han's heart. Even at this moment, the five tails in his body was out of character, no longer as arrogant as before. Instead, it sent him an urgent and nervous voice like a mature woman. Idiot, run away. That is a divine weapon called the Ten-Fist Sword, which can seal everything into a world of illusion. Quick, put away your complete tailed beast transformation. Don't let me get hit by that sword, otherwise, both you and I will be trapped in illusions and dreams for eternity. Hearing this voice for the first time, Han was stunned. And it was during this brief pause that, outside, Roar, the 120-meter-tall armored Susanoo Titan raised one foot and stomped on King Mu's hoof as hard as if he were pedaling a tricycle. Crack! One of King Mu's slender legs was instantly broken, and the Susanoo Titan single-handedly lifted the entire tailed beast and tossed it over his shoulder to the ground. Bang! Boom! The tremendous movement set off a new dust storm, which at one point engulfed nearly half of the Iwagakure army. Then, the Susanoo Titan stamped on King Mu's forehead, where a hole had been pierced and blood was gushing out, pinning him down under his feet, his Tenkin sword raised high. Command, Uchiha Chi commanded coldly, and the Susanoo Titan immediately thrust out with his sword. Flames erupted, piercing the five-tailed King Mu's front and hindquarters. At this moment, Han, the Jinchuriki, finally regained consciousness. A strong sense of crisis prompted him to act as the five-tailed King Mu had instructed, to immediately retract his full-tailed beast form. But how could this be? Chakra. I can't control it. Han, sweating profusely, his eyes bloodshot, stared in horror at the sea of fire spreading from King Mu's body before him. It was like Orochimaru, battling Uchiha Chi in the future, initially appearing completely unfazed by the ten-fisted sword, but within 5 seconds, he was completely utterly. Watching the man slam into the ruins of the plane, the Uchiha waved goodbye, not bothering to look at him again. With his tailed beasts torn away, this guy was doomed. Han, damn it, watching the five tails Jinchuriki defeated in the blink of an eye, even his tailed beasts extracted, Inoki gritted his teeth, his heart aching so much that he could barely breathe. The four tails Jinchuriki, Lao Shi, was on a mission in Yunming City, and given the current situation, his fate was likely to be catastrophic. And with the loss of the five tails in just a short while, the top-tier fighting force of the Iwagakure village had been nearly halved. For Iwagakure, this was simply unbearable pain. He turned and glared at the massive Susanoo Titan. At this moment, from below, from the direction of the Iwagakure intelligence team, an urgent shout came, "Search Hokage, we found it. That guy is inside the giant's head, between the eyebrows." Upon hearing this information, Inoki, who was extremely furious, immediately flew into the sky, and with a body as small as a small potato, rushed straight towards the 120-meter-tall giant. "You evil Uchiha brat, you killed my son, ruined my plan, and took away my tailed beast. This old man will grind you to ashes." Ha 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 ha. Hearing the frustrated curses of the short old man in front of him, floating in Susanoo, Uchiha Chi couldn't help but look up and laugh. "Inoki, you have lived to this age, but you haven't learned a lesson from the pain of the past. Whose fault is it? Why, what is wrong with this world? Do you think, do I have nothing better to do than to come and mess with you?" Uchiha Chi's face suddenly turned cold, and he stared at the flying old man indifferently, with a hideous smile on the corner of his mouth. "But that doesn't matter anymore, I'll bury you now," flying into the air. Looking at Uchiha Chi and Susanoo, he seemed to be brewing some new moves. Inoki's face sank, and he grinned. "You are the one who deserves to die." As soon as he finished speaking, he suddenly raised his palm, pushed forward the white cone of light in his palm, and shouted angrily, "Shukaku." Chapter 386, Shukaku looks as aggrieved as a child weighing thousands of tons. Shukaku, following a furious roar from Inoki in the sky, an old man with kind eyes, white hair and beard, draped in a blue and purple monk's robe, holding a Buddhist rosary in front of the Iwagakure army sighed softly. Beside him, Hua Guang, a senior ninja of Iwagakure, stared at him coldly and said in a deep voice, "Master Banfuku, Please fulfill your mission according to the agreement with the Tsunagakure upper echelons. This man was surprisingly the high monk Bafuku, the one-tailed Jinchuriki of Tsunagakure. On his other side, the young bald monk Hoichi looked at him with a troubled expression. Master, are you really going to do this? Didn't you say that you would fight Shukaku for the rest of your life, that you would influence him with kindness, and ultimately achieve a way for humans and the tailed beasts to coexist? Hearing his disciple's puzzled question, Bafuku sighed again and shook his head. Ultimately, he was too embarrassed to speak. He simply clasped his hands together and clasped the Buddhist rosary. The next moment, a yellow wave like an ocean surged from the earth. From the raging waves of the sand sea, a giant raccoon dog, 60 meters tall and made purely of sand and covered with curse marks all over its body, emerged on the waves. Old monk, you have finally released your inner demons. What Buddhist teachings, what benevolence, ha. It's all bullshit. Shukaku, who had regained his sight, laughed wildly, his tone full of gloating. Fenfu was helpless and could only sigh and call out, Shukaku, go fight. Our mission is to trap that guy with a sealing technique. However, the next moment, a huge shadow directly covered Shukaku. Shukaku looked up in bewilderment, and beheld a 120-meter-tall armored giant, Susanoo, towering before him. With its mere 60-meter height, it couldn't even reach the other's waist. Is this the Uchiha clan's Susanoo? Shukaku blinked, and the entire tailed beast was stunned, screaming in disbelief. What the hell? You want me to fight this thing? However, Bafuku had no other choice. If possible, he would never fight again, trapping Shukaku with his body and constantly influencing him with Buddhist teachings. But the village's survival was at stake. Ever since Uchiha Chi announced that he would commit the heinous act of assassinating the daimyo, the calls for the daimyo's execution have become increasingly louder in the village, and even the Sans village leaders are tempted. In order to lose the daimyo or to prevent the economic lifeline from being cut off after confronting the daimyo, the Sand village has to send a large number of personnel abroad to secretly carry out S-level war missions in order to accumulate wealth and share the blessings. Against this background, the monk who sealed the ferocious tailed beast with his body was allowed to be released by the Sand village leaders as an exception, and he worked hard for the village. At this moment, Bonfu's mouth was bitter. He could only pretend not to hear Shukaku's wailing, which was like a 1,000-ton child's grievance. Then, with a solemn expression, he gazed outward from his inner world and solemnly warned, be careful, that child is coming. Shukaku, we can only try the great burial seal of the desert lair. Shukaku was overwhelmed upon hearing this. His scalp tingled as he stared at the approaching behemoth. You call that a child? Damn old monk, if he didn't take action, he would be kicked over by the flaming giant. Shukaku gritted his teeth, roared angrily, and clasped his palms together. Roar! A huge wave of sand surged up, overturning the earth. Vast quantities of sand were continuously drawn from the soil, forming a vast ocean. This magnetic ninja technique was a feat that no ordinary magnetic ninja could ever replicate. With a roar, Shukaku controlled the sand, which instantly piled up to nearly 100 meters high, and pushed it towards the armored Susanoo Titan. Then, around him, a pyramidal structure condensed into a massive burial seal. Within Susanoo, Uchiha Chi's face was solemn. Not far behind Susanoo lay a chasm several hundred meters deep, created by the Iwagakure army. The Five Tails King's charge wasn't a mindless ramming spree, it was intended to push him into that spot. This way, the Iwagakure army, who could only watch helplessly from the sidelines, could join in this battle reminiscent of a mythical retelling. A quick glance revealed at least hundreds of Iwagakure's blasting troops and Noki would tear through the defenses, while explosive clay and Iwagakure members, skilled in explosive techniques, would unleash a continuous bombardment measured in days. With Uchiha Chi's limited chakra, being trapped in such a situation would be extremely difficult. Therefore, at the cost of his eye power and vision, he forced the use of the eye technique within his main Gekyo Sharingan. The Iwagakure was anxious, but Uchiha Chi was even more anxious. Given the current situation, he had to unleash his strongest attraction yet, forcing the 10,000 Iwagakure to attack him continuously, leaving Inoki no time to kill hidden with his dust release. He had to force them to not attack him, leaving him free to inflict a devastating blow to the Iwagakure army. Then, taking advantage of the situation, he would penetrate the Iwagakure lines in one fell swoop and take his younger brother away. At this moment, Shukaku and Inoki attacked from both sides, temporarily restraining the Susanoo Titan's movements with a desert layer Great Burial Seal Inoki, in that instant, aimed at Susanoo's head and released a cone of white light. Dust release, original realm separation technique. If Uchiha Chi used his original form to evade, the Susanoo Titan would be completely sealed by Shukaku, unable to move. P.S. The Senjutsu generated by natural energy was exhausted in resisting the Five Tails Mu-O's boiling release. The fourth stage Susanoo is not a fully formed Susanoo, and without the power of Senjutsu, it cannot break free from the desert layer Great Burial Seal. If Uchiha Chi did not evade and instead used Susanoo to deal with Shukaku, he would be instantly disintegrated into atoms by the dust release technique. In this situation, Uchiha Chi's expression grew increasingly serious. He had to deflect Inoki's attack while simultaneously killing Shukaku. And the means to achieve this goal, Uchiha Chi was silent for a moment, his gaze lowered to his abdomen, and he took a deep breath. Previously, he had been using his eye power, fighting with his main Gekyo Sharingan. Now, the Eight Tails Horn Orochimaru had procured became the key to breaking through the impasse. But this wasn't without cost. Using this last bit of chakra to break through the impasse, the price of victory in the subsequent battles might be using this newly acquired main Gekyo Sharingan to the point of blindness. However, just as Uchiha Chi secretly made up his mind, ready to give it his all, no one could have imagined that a menacing figure, completely unexpected, suddenly burst through the air and attacked. Inoki, with a roar of utter fury, the ferocious old man, his arms and legs severed, grievously wounded from enduring Uchiha Chi's relentless assaults. Gaping holes in his abdomen and chest, his intestines spilling out, brandished 3 pairs of scarlet tails transformed into wings, dragging one of them backwards as he charged forward. The third Hokage, AI, was still alive, and at that moment, he had rendered Uchiha Chi a great service. His eyes, one gold and one red, traced dotted lines across the battlefield, taking in the situation. Uchiha Chi, with a firm grasp on the situation, took a deep breath. His gaze fell upon Shukaku, who lay like a dog beneath him. "Let's finish you off first, you beast." His eyes widened, and he swung his palm in fury. 8 mandala petals swirled wildly within his main Gekyo Sharingan. The gold in the Susanoo giant's left hand quietly dissipated. Then, between heaven and earth, another terrifying, piercing aura rose, chilling the very core of the being. Mythical projection, Aim no Kurosakimo sword. Chapter 387 Amasakura again appears, and the black light wheel slashes. A chilling, sharp aura permeated the landscape. The Iwagakure tribe could not discern its source, feeling only as if a sharp blade hung overhead, poised to strike at any moment. As the target, locked in the aura's grasp and bearing the brunt of the attack, Shukaku, the one-tailed beast, felt a physical sensation of what humans call a tingling sensation. Even the sand on his body trembled as if it were ripping apart. Knowing he had been targeted by the unknown Uchiha among the Susanoo Titans, Shukaku, with no escape route, gritted his teeth and gazed upon the armored Susanoo Titan, which was being engulfed and swallowed by the sea of sand, concentrating even more fervently on his sealing technique. At that moment, in the sky, Inoki's white cone of light had already gathered momentum, and he thrust it out with both palms, aiming it at Uchiha Chi, who was trapped within Susanoo. But then, with a grim expression, he cursed, "Damn it!" From in front of him, a flash of lightning flickered, appearing and disappearing, darting towards him like a javelin. With all his limbs severed, he had no choice but to raise his head, using it as a weapon. The third Hokage roared and charged at Inoki's dust release, practically inviting his own death. The white cone of light shot out, striking the third Hokage directly. At that point, even the strongest lightning release armor, the tailed beast coat, and the carapace derived from the Seven Tails possession were unable to stop the white cone's advance. Starting from his left shoulder, it enveloped half of the third Hokage's body, disintegrating into atoms and vanishing from this world. The third Hokage, AI, cost himself half his body, his eyes blasted open as he crashed headfirst into the third Hokage, Inoki's chest and abdomen. Suddenly, the two old men tangled, their inertia propelling them backwards nearly 100 meters, Inoki's dust release, piercing Susanoo's armor and about to pierce Uchiha Chi, froze and flung far back. Hokage, Inoki's furious roar echoed in his ears. The thrill of a life-or-death experience made Uchiha Chi gasp, his adrenaline racing. He had no time to repair the Susanoo, its face vanished from sight. At that moment, his main Gekyo Jutsu was complete. The second power of the mythical Susanoo was about to be channeled upon him. Looking down at Shukaku, on the verge of madness, Uchiha Chi's eyes darkened. Just as the great burial seal of the desert lair was about to be completed, he leaped from Susanoo, eyes wide open in anger, hands clasped together. The veins around his eyes pulsed wildly at this moment. Senjutsu, inorganic reincarnation, 8 clouds of dust, like waves of spray, suddenly erupted from the surface of the sand sea. Then, 8 giant snakes formed from sand emerged from the sea, swarming over Shukaku and grasping him tightly. The tips of the 8 serpents' enormous tails landed right in front of the young man who was now leaping down. Uchiha Chi didn't hesitate for a moment, as if summoning all the strength of his past and present lives. The skin on his face twisted monstrously. He spread his palms, firmly grasping the tails of the 8 serpents. Then, he pulled a brilliant white light from them. A white light stretched over 1,000 meters, revealing a double-edged blade as white as a cloud. This was the legendary sword that Susanoo plucked from the tail of the Yamata no Orochi after slaying it. This sword, renowned for its sharpness and strength, could pierce anything. It was an undeniable weapon of destruction. Shukaku watched with a shudder as the 1,000-meter-long beam of brilliant white light was grasped by the Uchiha brat flying from the sky. Then, he saw, the Uchiha brat's eyes were bloodshot, his scarlet Sharingan wide open, and a ferocious, demonic, and mad aura emanated from him. He twisted his waist and lowered his head in midair, spinning and tumbling. He swung the 1,000-meter-long lightsaber in a circle and swept it down. With a clang, a single sword chant was heard. There was no roar, no explosion, not even a murmur. Everything was enveloped by the 1,000-meter-long lightsaber's downward slash. The Iwagakure ninjas, their eyes wide open, attempting to resist with earth escape techniques, the sand sea, the earth, the weeds, the hard rock, the kunai, the weapons, even Shukaku. Everything, was split in two as a thin white line illuminated. As the saying goes, the sharper the blade, the easier it is to cut through. At the same time, the sharper the blade, the more likely it is to chip, curl, and dull. Like two sides of the same coin, never having both. But before this divine sword, the two coexisted in a twisted yet harmonious symbiosis. Sharp enough to cut atoms, hard as diamond, never wearing, never chipping. This was the divine weapon, the Inkurakumo sword. The white line illuminated, as if nothing had happened, yet it felt as if countless hours had passed in that instant. Feeling no pain, nor the expected situation of being seriously injured by the opponent's sword, Shukaku blinked a little confusedly, raised his hand to look, then, it laughed shrilly, suddenly raised its head, staring at Uchiha Chi who was jumping down from mid-air. That's it, Uchiha kid, I thought you were so strong. Ho 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 ho, take my shot, wind style, sky training. The words stopped abruptly at this moment. Shukaku suddenly found that the two cocky claws that he was accustomed to stretching out to clap could not be closed together well. Wait? What's going on? Leaping in front of Shukaku, Uchiha Chi dissipated the lightsaber in his hand, raised his head breathlessly, then, with a height of less than 1.7 meters, he stood in front of Shukaku who was 60 meters tall, stretched out a finger and pushed forward. The next instant, the atoms at the microscopic level were severed, disrupting all the medium, dust, and sand within the plane of the white line. Light refracted wildly for a brief moment, then consumed by whatever remained. And so, a vast, tilted black halo encompassing a kilometer suddenly illuminated. Shukaku, the earth, and everything in the path of the Aim no Kurosuk sword were split into two sides. The upper side began to plummet downwards. Boom, 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 only then did a deafening roar erupt. What is this? What is this? What the hell is this? Shukaku stared in horror at his bisected body. Composed of sand, the tailed beast's body should have been immune to such physical damage, instantly healing even after being cut. But now, as if something had continuously severed the connection between the upper and lower halves, Shukaku had completely lost consciousness in the lower half. The shudder of familiarity becoming unfamiliar suddenly overwhelmed him, sending a wave of panic through him. You evil Uchiha brat, Shukaku screamed, glaring intently at the calm Uchiha Chi beneath him. His face twisted as he demanded, what the hell have you done to me? However, his response was, instantly breaking free from the desert lair's great burial seal, weakened by the loss of chakra. A massive foot lunged towards him, a 42,000-yard leg. Chapter 388, 10000 vs. 1. The 120-meter-tall armored Susanoo crushed the face of the hilariously laughing Shukaku with a single kick, pinning him to the ground, immobilizing him. The hollow, faceless Susanoo raised its head, surveying the surrounding landscape with a silent roar of triumph. This scene was deeply engraved in the minds of tens of thousands of Iwagakure ninjas, a mark that would never be forgotten, like a branding iron. Uchiha Chi stood before the Susanoo, his head slightly tilted upward, gazing skyward. There, the old man, who had fought to the death protecting his homeland, plummeted like a kite with a broken string. The Susanoo Titan raised its palm to catch the man, sending his remains flat on the ground before Uchiha Chi. The third Hokage, Ai, chose to sacrifice his life for injury, forcefully knocking Inoki back, effectively denying him the opportunity to use dust release to create a disparate situation. This undoubtedly aided Uchiha Chi. At this point, despite knowing the other party's inability to protect Kumagakure, he could only rely on his own might to protect Kumagakure, which was why he took such a life-threatening action. But now, looking at the half-remaining old man before him, barely breathing, Uchiha Chi couldn't help but shake his head and sigh. The third Hokage, Ai, weakly opened his eyes, wanting to say something, but ultimately remained silent. He actually admired Uchiha Chi, almost to the point of love. Back in Jigakure, he'd said that if Uchiha Chi had been born in Kumagakure, he'd have ceded the position of Hokage to him, and that was a statement from the heart. The two sides had different positions, but their willingness to sacrifice everything for those they cherished could be sensed through the clash of chakra. Unfortunately, this was war. Justice and injustice, in such a conflict, became blurred to the point of being indistinguishable. In the end, Ai simply stared blankly at Uchiha Chi, his lips curling into a wry, somewhat shamefaced smile. Then, he closed his eyes and passed away. He didn't ask for anything in exchange for knocking Inoki back and saving Uchiha Chi's life, nor did he ultimately beg Uchiha Chi to do anything for Kumagakure. As the Hokage, he had already made the right decision. After the roar of Amamusukoku's sword died down, the field fell eerily still, like the calm before a storm. The cold, silent air weighed heavily on the heart. Countless heavy breathing merged, countless anxious gazes converged, directed at the young man towering above the vast sea of sand, and the 120-meter-tall faceless giant behind him, towering over everyone, standing on Shukaku's head. Having lost two tailed beasts in quick succession, they still couldn't defeat this behemoth. Now, all that was left was the army of 10,000 men, treated like playthings before them, and the solitary third Hokage, Inoki. But no one retreated. The Iwagakure village had staked its national destiny on this battle. If it returned empty-handed, like Kumagakure, having lost all the power of its tailed beasts, what would be its future in the Third Shinobi World War? No one dared to imagine, nor was anyone willing to accept such an outcome. Like a gambler driven to the edge of his seat, he could only throw everything at the table. Meanwhile, Uchiha Chi was breathing heavily, the Mangekyo Sharingan in his right eye fading from golden to crimson, a stream of blood and tears trickling down his face. He had repeatedly used his Mangekyo eye techniques, projecting the Tensuken sword, the Aim no Kirakumo sword, and even Susanoo, which had remained in its fourth stage. His eye power was nearing exhaustion, and even his vision was blurring. This eye was capable of summoning the divine power of Susanoo. Projecting the Tensuken sword and the Aim no Kirakumo sword was merely borrowing the divine weapons, not their own power. Continuing to use the Mangekyo Sharingan would unleash the true terror within it, Susanoo's true form. That was the true Susanoo of myth and legend, capable of slaying the god of Hoshoka with his bare hands, shaking Takamagahara with his mere movement, and inflicting fear upon the gods. It was a forbidden eye technique, usable only once in a lifetime, at the cost of blindness. Thanks to the Hokage's assist, Uchiha Chi now had no intention of using this precious eye technique here. Uchiha Madara had already noticed him, which meant that the Moon Eye project remained an unavoidable nightmare. To stop it would inevitably lead to a direct confrontation with a true Shura of the ninja world. This bloodline-level killer Mangekyo eye technique, a killer move, should be reserved for that moment. And now, the dust cleared, and the two sides met gazes on the battlefield. A concentrated, utterly murderous intent suddenly surged. Uchiha Chi took a deep breath, closing his right eye, which was shedding tears of blood and severely blurring his vision. He opened his left eye, and three jet-black magadamas whirled wildly around his vertical pupil. He extended his right hand, tapping his abdomen with his bare hands. The last bit of chakra contained within the eight tail's horns was released. The raging chakra of the tailed beast shook a column of wind, sending strands of hair from Uchiha Chi's forehead soaring into the air. It transformed into a bright yellow nine-tails tunic. Behind him, 100-meter-tall Setsuna drifted away in the wind. Then, Uchiha Chi pressed his fist against his heart, unleashing a forbidden technique and summoning the Kusanagi sword from his wrist guard. With only chakra remaining, he could only muster the skills of a ninja 10,000 versus 1. Uchiha Chi suddenly raised his eyes, took a deep breath, and beneath the gloomy sky, he reached behind his head and tightened the straps of his forehead guard. With a rolling motion of his feet, his hands behind his back, he took a step, ran, and charged. Resolutely, they charged towards the endless, unfurling banners of the 10,000-man Iwagakure army before them. Here he comes, the light, swift footsteps beat like drums in the hearts of the 10,000 Iwagakure. The whistling wind and sand between heaven and earth pressed against their faces, burning with heat. Countless Iwagakure opened their eyes wide, faces solemn, as they gazed upon the figure, a bright line of fire, charging at them at high speed. They swallowed hard, holding their breath in fear. They had no way of knowing whether the brat could still unleash the terrifying giant Setsuna, nor could they be sure if he would survive the ensuing battle. But the only thing they knew for sure was that they had to fight. In the sky, Inoki, clutching his waist and gritting his teeth, descended upon the army formation. Watching Uchiha Chi's mere charge nearly destabilize the 10,000-man army, his expression darkened, his eyes gleaming with uncontrollable murderous intent. I absolutely must kill him, absolutely, that brat. If we don't kill him now, he'll definitely become the next Uchiha Madara, a ninja sure untethered by Hashirama Senju. A deranged thug who could single-handedly sweep across the ninja world. The mere thought of such a being sent chills down Inoki's spine. Trembling with fear, he wished he could strangle him to death. With this thought in mind, Inoki's eyes flashed with cold light as he gazed directly at the line of fire. From his perch in front of the army formation, he roared, "Everyone, follow the plan, kill." Chapter 389 Inoki, Dance. At first, Uchiha Chi, destined to become a mighty warrior sent from heaven to end the chaotic world, wanted only to escape. He thought, what business did a passing genin have on him? However, his quest to escape fate and pursue death for the greater good unknowingly reaped one irresistible reward after another. Family, friendship, love, and, ultimately, exploding power. His ever-increasing power brought him a status utterly mismatched with his mindset, and the embarrassment of being forced into choices before he had even fully transformed. To him, the world truly felt like a monster-killing and leveling up game. From the moment he stepped out of the village gate, he felt a depth of mockery, the powerful warriors swarming around him becoming his ladder to advancement. A false prosperity, a false peace, a false world, and a false self. It wasn't until that night in Hell Valley that Uchiha Chi suddenly realized the blurring of reality and illusion. He was completely unprepared. He possessed the power to change everything, yet he simply allowed tragedy to unfold. And now, having witnessed the untimely end of an enemy he had initially believed was destined to fight to the death simply because they stood on different sides, the enemy was human too, with his own sense of justice. Like himself, he was willing to sacrifice for those he cherished. It wasn't that he felt pity for his enemy's death, Uchiha Chi simply found it a bit ridiculous and absurd. Killing someone like himself, just because they stood on different sides, was considered justice. But who defined justice? Who defined opposition? From his omniscient perspective, Uchiha Chi saw the outbreak of the Ninja World War as the result of another conspiracy. This felt a sense of unease, yet he couldn't explain what was wrong. It felt like the question explored in the original novel. In this world, the clash of good breeds evil. Love breeds bloodshed, sparking hatred, which feeds hatred, igniting a new round of war. So, whose fault is this? Why? Why is the world like this? How can the chains of hatred be broken? The original novel's explanation is that he forcibly forged a period of peace with immense power, treating all nations with generosity and kindness. However, in the future, he was still affected by the alien war, forced to make way for the second-generation protagonist, and ultimately imprisoned by a beast, Uzumaki Naruto, in Daikokuten. Uchiha Chi, knowing all this, knew of the future, the tailed beast capture plan, the Moon Eye Project, the Fourth Shinobi World War, Kaguya Otsutsuki's resurrection, the lunar attack, the aliens, the Age of Tattoos, the divine art that enveloped the ninja world and rewrote everyone's will. He knew everything, including the true owner of this outrageous art, the Otsutsuki god lurking within the stars. Yet, he did nothing, never actively planning for the future. Until this moment, this distorted world, the secretly manipulated war, and the distorted feeling caused by the death of the third Hokage, AI, before his eyes, suddenly awakened Uchiha Chi. Humanity, possessing a brilliant will, perished in a war that should never have begun. Since he had already acknowledged this world and hoped to protect those he cherished, after countless battles, he possessed the power to sweep across the ninja world, the power to truly change everything. At this moment, as he charged toward the army of 10,000, Uchiha Chi began to reckon with the choice he had made to avoid in the past. Will you become a tough guy sent from the sky, beneath the gloomy sky, wind and sand, propelled by the turbulent air, danced wildly toward the sky? Within the silent world, awareness and roars echoed from the surging lines of fire. A soaring cry of killing rose up, followed by Inoki's furious roar. Kill, Taijutsu troops, prepare your rock fists, smash that brat's head in. 3rd Squadron, prepare the 10,000 miles earthflow wall, weaken his momentum, build a trap with the earthquake core. He no longer has that giant. This is our chance, quick. The hundreds of meters separating the lone Uchiha Chi and the 10,000-man Iwagakure army became the crucial battleground. The Iwagakure's plan necessitated halting Uchiha Chi's charge at this distance, trapping him, and then allowing Inoki to unleash his ultimate dust release to kill him. Otherwise, the battle would become a drawn-out battle, similar to the one that killed the third Hokage in the original story, relying solely on numbers to attrition. After all, even if he wanted to kill him, the third Hokage couldn't risk the wrath of his own horde by unleashing dust release, separation limit jutsu. He couldn't afford the cost of thousands of Iwagakure and Uchiha Chi perishing together. And in the stalemate, Iwagakure had no assurance of victory against Uchiha Chi, who had sealed and possessed the 5 tails and was ready to become a Jinchuriki. At that moment, boom, crowded within the 600-meter-long ruins, thousands of Earth-style, earthflow walls piled and rose, eventually forming a massive rectangular rock wall 50 meters high, 50 meters thick, and hundreds of meters long. It blocked Uchiha Chi's path. Watching this scene, Uchiha Chi, without a moment's hesitation, dashed forward with his right palm, transforming his chakra into that of the 2 tails. From his palm, he rolled out more a ball of blue flames. It spun, accelerated, and spun furiously. Senjutsu, flame style, super large Rasenshuriken. This Rasenshuriken, created with a 2 tails flame style chakra, combined the properties of wind and fire. Unlike Naruto's wind style Rasenshuriken, this technique focused on using wind to enhance fire, greatly increasing its explosive power, surpassing even the tailed beast ball. Shattering the wall in one blow was no problem. That brat's first technique is here, is this chakra fluctuation the tailed beast ball. At this time, the Iwagakure intelligence personnel who observed this scene from the side of the battlefield felt their scalps tingling, and immediately passed this information to the central army behind the giant wall. Hua Guang, that brat rubbed the tailed beast ball with his hands. The Wanli Earthflow wall doesn't estimate that he can stop him. Quick, reinforce the city wall, let the trap squad speed up and create trenches and sinkhole detonation points. Hua Guang, the elite Jonin of Iwagakure who was in charge of the command, was shocked when he learned about it. He looked at the giant wall solemnly, and then he raised his head and shouted to the sky according to the predetermined rules. Tsukage-sama, we can't let the tailed beast ball explode. You need to take action. I understand. Inoki's face condensed, and he nodded immediately. He used the earth escape, light and heavy rock technique to float in the air and fly over the giant wall. Uchiha Chi had used a similar tactic during the Battle of Jigakudani. Back then, he had used the dark chakra of the Zero Tail to create a technique called Senjutsu, Super Large Ball, Dark-Tailed Beast Ball Expansion Rasengan, destroying 2 tailed beast balls with a single strike. This technique, which surpassed the tailed beast balls, was a key area of investigation for Iwagakure, and Inoki was aware of this information and had researched a solution to it. At this point, the quickest and most direct method was for him to soar high into the sky and use dust release from mid-range to strike the unexploded tailed beast ball Rasengan, silencing it. However, after flying over the massive wall, Inoki, who had been on high alert, suddenly froze. From his perspective, the Uchiha brat suddenly stopped a short distance in front of the wall, holding a terrifying chakra ball blazing with blue flames. As if anticipating his presence, Uchiha raised his head, stuck at the maximum attack range of dust release, and gave him a cold sneer. He didn't throw the spiral shuriken at the massive wall, blasting through the Iwagakure defenses. Instead, he shot it straight into the sky. At that moment, a sense of foreboding spread wildly through Inoki's heart. Then, a playful voice that had briefly given him a kind of hallucination echoed faintly, "Old man of the two scales, dance." Chapter 390, It's so ugly, can't you even dance? Suddenly, a tooth-aching white blade of light swirled, a sphere swirling madly in reverse, a sphere filled with raging rat flames, a spiral shuriken with power exceeding the limits of the tailed beasts. Under Inoki's horrified gaze, it pierced the dark clouds in the sky. The next moment, boom, the clouds twisted, the sky suddenly darkened, and blue lightning roared. For some reason, Inoki felt his heart beating non-stop, like the beat of a drum that suddenly quickened in rhythm. Anxiety and panic came over him one after another. What is he going to do? This fire style, is he going to create thunderclouds and unleash his terrifying S-rank lightning style? No, the power of this one-tailed beast fall alone has already surpassed lightning style, Kirin. Besides, this brat had already summoned dense thunderclouds at the beginning of the battle. If he wanted to unleash lightning style, Kirin, he wouldn't have needed to do that. Damn it, it was impossible to guess what Uchiha was trying to do, and the ominous premonition became heavier. Sweat dripped from Inoki's forehead. He couldn't find the answer no matter how hard he tried. Finally, his eyes turned fierce, and he suddenly turned to Uchiha who was stopped in front of the rock wall. No matter what technique it is, as long as the caster is killed, it will be stopped. With this thought, Inoki leaped down without hesitation and swooped down at Uchiha at a high speed. However, Uchiha tapped the ground and quickly pulled back. As he did so, a layer of azure lightning began to emanate from his body, and even his hair exploded upward like a Saiyan. He transformed into a streak of lightning and leaped forward. Lightning release, chakra mode, strongest lightning release armor, activated. Even though Inoki had moved with impeccable speed, his earth release, light heavy rock jutsu was too fast to even catch Uchiha's taillights. Uchiha maintained a constant distance between the two, neither too far nor too close. In the two previous battles, Inoki had used dust release several times, and in doing so, he had already calculated the opponent's dust release's maximum range. Uchiha was no fool. The third Hokage's difficulty with Iwagakure stemmed from the swiftness of this lightning release chakra mode. The Hokage was able to outmaneuver Inoki with it, even single-handedly battling an Iwagakure army of 10,000 for 3 days and 3 nights in the original story. Having mastered this technique, Uchiha naturally sought to emulate it. Even the most devastating move was useless if it missed. And now, it was Inoki who should be anxious. If the opponent revealed a flaw in this next move, the outcome of this battle would be decided in an instant. Throwing the Sage technique, Flame style, Supergiant Shuriken into the air, the tailed beast ball level fire style heat combined with the inherent spiral suction of the wind style Shuriken further propels the celestial phenomena summoned by the thunder god sword, Butamitsu, accumulating and summoning even larger thunder clouds. Leveraging the power of nature, he amplifies another of Uchiha's extreme ninjutsu. Lightning style, Kirin alone is naturally insufficient to annihilate the 10,000-man Iwagakure army. However, if Uchiha pushes the power of heaven to its limit, and then fuses it with the Thunder God Sword's inherently powerful move, Izumo Kakusai, he can harness the power of heaven and earth to summon an ultimate lightning style capable of engulfing the entire plain battlefield. Damn it, I can't catch up. What's more, this brat is definitely keeping his distance intentionally. He has already calculated the attack range of dust release. Did Orochimaru even steal lightning release? Chakra mode. Inoki was indignant, staring at Uchiha who could keep him far away from the limit even when walking backwards. He could only grit his teeth. The only plan now is to burst out chakra and perform dust release, separation limit technique, forcibly extend the attack range and kill this brat by surprise. But, how far has he cultivated lightning release, chakra mode? If we still can't hit his entire body, this battle will, for Inoki, there are 2 points that cannot be ignored at the moment. If he performs dust release, separation limit technique, his chakra and waist injury will not be enough to support the next battle. If he cannot eliminate Uchiha with the scale of this technique, both Iwagakure and he will be in risk of dying here. Furthermore, it remained to be seen whether the dust release, Separation limit jutsu could fully penetrate Uchiha Chi, who possessed the ultimate speed of the supreme lightning release armor. He could not instantly wipe Uchiha Chi from this world. Inoki deeply doubted that even with only a head left, this imp, known for his immortality, could regenerate in an instant. If he didn't use it, even if he kicked his short legs until they smoked, he wouldn't be able to catch up to Uchiha Chi. The opponent's technique would still fail. The situation was extremely unfavorable. If they failed to make further decisions, their defeat was imminent. This was a gamble. And Uchiha Chi was gambling too. He was deliberately dangling his life before Inoki, betting that Inoki wouldn't make up his mind to use the dust release, separation limit jutsu. He even used his own life to kidnap all the Iwagakure ninjas below. At this moment, looking at Inoki with a conflicted face and gnashing teeth, Uchiha Chi couldn't help but reveal a playful smile. Come on, Inoki, make a decision. Let me see if your will is worthy of the title of Shadow. The sky became increasingly gloomy, and the light between heaven and earth seemed to be swallowed up by dense thunder clouds, leaving only the thick thunder that flashed from time to time. After half a minute of accumulation, Uchiha Chi stopped abruptly and turned around before returning to the rock wall with Inoki hanging far away and making a big circle. Looking at Inoki flying rapidly behind him, he couldn't help shaking his head. He had expected Inoki to surprise him, but Alice, this Inoki wasn't the Inoki of the Fourth Shinobi World War. The Will of Stone, inherited by the first Hokage, Uchiha, had been utterly crushed and shattered against Uchiha Madara 40 years prior. As if out of reluctance, or perhaps to prove himself, he had fought tooth and nail to usher in the heyday of the Hidden Rock Village, becoming the longest-serving Hokage in the Land of Earth. However, without the idealistic words of Gaara, the young Kage, and the unity of the five Kage, he was constantly outmatched by Uchiha Madara. Gradually recalling his past, this old man, who had enjoyed smooth sailing, and who later generations considered pedantic, ultimately failed to unleash his fullest will before Uchiha Chi. How ugly, Inoki. Can't even dance. Uchiha Chi looked at him with regret, shook his head slightly, and scoffed. So-called rock is nothing more than the hardened surface of dust after years of huddling together for warmth. Inoki, the will you uphold is nothing more than this. The moment the words fell, Uchiha Chi's face turned cold and he waved his palm. Crack, everything under the gloomy sky was suddenly dyed pale by the shocking thunder. At this moment, a cold shout, at this moment, resounded across the entire plain amid the pale faces of the 10,000 rock hidden in Inoki. Disappear with the thunder, Super Kulin. Chapter 391, The Army is Destroyed, The Sword of Kulin. Squeak, 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 the gloomy sky suddenly brightened. Lightning bolts like tree branches intertwined in the sky, spreading and expanding like a spider web, instantly extending beyond the reach of the human eye. 10,000 thunders roared, like millions of kale flowers blooming simultaneously. This scale, no matter how you look at it, it's too much. Unlike the lightning release, Kirin technique Uchiha Chi had used during his time in Hell Valley, which only enveloped a section of the cliff, this moment, a tiny sliver of lightning shone through the sky, enveloping the entire plain in front of the central mountain range of the Land of Lightning. Its scale was so vast, like a giant hand of lightning plucked from the heavens by God. In an instant, it descended upon us. Damn it! How could it be this large? Seeing this scene, Inoki's face twisted slightly. If he had known this would happen, he would have dispersed the clouds directly, or attacked Uchiha Chi directly. But that's how people are. The more they try to gain something, the more they end up losing something truly important and precious. Inoki suddenly stopped in midair, gritted his teeth, and then soared straight into the sky. With a thundercloud this size, it should still be in time to perform dust release, separation limit technique. However, Uchiha Chi simply watched the scene calmly, sneered and shook his head. It's too late to make a choice now, and, Inoki, you've made another foolish decision. The moment his words fell, Uchiha Chi's eyes fixed, and 26 bones, a color ranging from bright yellow to crimson, rose rapidly from the ground behind him. A 30-meter tall half-skeletal Susanoo appeared before the countless Iwagakure in a pale flash of lightning. He raised his arm, clasped his bony palms together, and from his palms, he pulled out an 18-meter-long thunder sword. Then, he raised it to the sky. The thunderbolts in the sky instantly deflected from Inoki's dust release beam, rendering his efforts in vain. Then, it slashed down from the clouds, transforming into a pale pillar of lightning 10 meters thick, rumbling into the thunder god's sword, Buta Mimayo. held in the giant skeleton's hand. The 18-meter-long thunderbolt sword visibly began to blaze with brilliant light, like the sun rising high in its palm. Over 1 billion volts of voltage, unleashed by a thunderstorm, concentrated on the blade surface. In the next instant, Uchiha Chi raised his eyebrows in a cold glare, his tongue uttering thunderous words. He swung his palm sword and slashed. A mortal thunder killin, its massive form quietly reflected in the sword's light. Suddenly, its body soared 1,000 feet above the clouds, and it lightly leaped toward the Iwagakure army behind the rock wall. In an instant, heaven and earth fell silent. A ring of lightning expanded from its origin. Boom, the earth was instantly engulfed, and the vegetation, insects, and rocks on the plain swayed and vanished in an instant. A massive mushroom cloud soared into the air, and the entire plain in front of the central mountain range of the Land of Lightning trembled like an earthquake under this divinely wielded sword. From the point of detonation, the air wave propelled everything within it, expanding outward like a tide. Vast quantities of earth were continuously pushed out and accumulated at the edges, eventually forming a circular wall with a radius of 10 kilometers. And within this explosion of light, another inconspicuous, faint white light rose quietly, filled with regret. It seemed to be atonement for a mistake, but also like a futile struggle. Only when the fierce light faded and the dust and smoke dispersed did a charred crater nearly 20 kilometers wide appear. The devastated ruins, the crimson earth stained red with blood, the molten iron of Kune, the charred corpses, and a vast expanse of unidentified objects reduced to ash. Uchiha Chi's eyelids twitched as he watched the scene unfold. He had swung his sword because he had very little chakra left. The eight-tailed horn, or Orochimaru's final gift, was only enough to unleash a single, upgraded tailed beast ball. This desperate act, relying solely on the power of nature, had unexpectedly produced such terrifying results. This sight immediately brought back the slightly inflated spirit Uchiha Chi had felt after opening his main Gekyo Sharingan. Without the 6 paths, one could not contend with the might of nature. And this technique, powered by the power of nature, lightning release, Super Kirin, had an exaggerated range, nearly rivaling Super Shinra Tensei. The setting is based on the Death Forest next to Konoha. The official early setting book states the Death Forest is 10 kilometers in diameter, but the aerial view of Konoha shows it to be roughly twice the size of the Death Forest, as shown in the image. Yet, amidst this despair, amidst the ruins, there was a relatively well-preserved square patch of land. There, huddled together, stood Iwagakure ninjas, their faces vacant and their eyes filled with bewilderment. Standing behind a 50-meter rock wall, they had no idea what was happening, or even what had attacked them. They only saw a white light falling from the sky, and then, everything around them was annihilated bit by bit in the light. At this moment, they could only look forward with eyes full of confusion and dullness. Inoki was half kneeling in front of the army alone, his clothes torn, and he was forcibly beaten into the form of the original Chunin war. At this time, he was gasping for breath, his head was full of blood, and his 2 hands were raised with difficulty. This action seemed to be resisting something, and seemed to be worshipping something. At the moment when the Super Kirin jumped down, Inoki finally chose to burn all the chakra in his body. Before returning to the Iwagakure army, he performed the Forbidden Dust Release, limit-stripping technique, which forcibly annihilated part of the Super Kirin's power and saved part of the Iwagakure army. But, reflecting the inquiring, bewildered, and sorrowful gazes of the crowd, Inoki turned his head and looked at the army behind him. Now, of the tens of thousands of Iwagakure, only a sparse number remained, the Sealing Squad, the Guard Squad, and a small number of members of the Demolition Squad, led by the elite Iwagakure Junin, Ho Guang, standing in the center. A single Super Kirin shot instantly vaporized over 9,000 Iwagakure ninjas. Now, standing behind Inoki, only a mere 1,000 ninjas remained, and most of them had suffered heavy injuries from the aftermath of the giant creatures battle in the previous battle. This battle brought out all the strength of the Iwagakure clan, attempting to achieve the greatest possible victory with minimal casualties. However, the man who had built the Iwagakure clan to its current peak, now brought him to ruin. Staring blankly behind him at the Iwagakure ninjas, each face suddenly filled with pain as if realizing something, Inoki felt at all the emotions that had sustained him, that had kept him fighting till now, that had fueled his struggle, the resentment, anger, hatred, and the fear that had driven him to action since the night of the devastating defeat 40 years ago, had returned to him at this moment. Even as Cage, one of the strongest among the 5 great nations. Before the true heir of that family, he was still like a fragile child, kneeling on the ground, gazing up at the divine light. In this heart, wrapped in the will of the rock, it felt as if a string had snapped. Finally, a long, eerie silence descended. After finally recovering, swallowing the pain and accepting this despairing reality, the next moment, patter, 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 a steady, powerful sound of footsteps echoed. The remaining Iwagakure residents, startled like birds, looked up and saw it, walking over the devastated ruins, the charred earth stained red with blood, molten iron transformed from kune, and the charred remains of bodies. The demon responsible for this tragedy was marching towards them. Elsewhere, Orochimaru, standing atop the Hokage building, had watched the entire battle from beginning to end. At that moment, a flicker of fear flickered in his eyes. From a considerable distance, he covered his left eye with his hand, opened his right, and stared at the disciple standing before the hidden cloud village, single-handedly defeating 10,000. His brow furrowed deeply. This isn't right. How could he have performed such a massive technique with only the tiny bit of chakra within the 8-tailed horns? It completely defies the rules of chakra compensation, as if using another force to offset the energy consumed by activating Susanoo. Is that what the Uchiha clan calls pupil power? And just now, the moment that kilometer-long white sword appeared, the Kusanagi sword within me nearly broke free of my control and flew out. Orochimaru narrowed his eyes slightly, locking onto Uchiha Chi's strangely closed right eye with his Byakugan. Did the strange pattern on this eye appear after the battle with the Hokage? A hint of displeasure crossed Orochimaru's face at the thought. Did I miss the process of the new power appearing because of the transfer of my Byakugan? But soon, this trace of displeasure was hidden. Orochimaru stretched out his tongue, licked the corner of his mouth, and chuckled faintly. It doesn't matter, I probably know the process of birth, so, I can get the same eyes. Besides, there is a better choice now. With this thought, Orochimaru smiled slightly, and the purple eyeshadow around his eyes quietly extended an inch, making his already cold and weird face even more weird, and a pair of golden snake pupils bloomed with cunning brilliance. Then, quit. Next, let's compete to see who progresses faster. If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 392 Intermission, Snake Path. In the deep charred ruins, the Iwagakure army, with less than 1,000 people left, looked at the figure approaching from a distance in horror. That is, Devil, the painful murmurs awakened Inoki, who was kneeling in front of the army. He raised his head and saw a young man walking slowly, his clothes bursting into strips due to excessive force. At this moment, he was already close to him, but ignored the weak Inoki who had no chakra at this time and the Iwagakure behind him, and walked straight forward. As he walked, the faces of the members of the Iwagakure army changed from confusion to resentment, and from resentment to fear. One by one, they silently made way, lined up in 2 rows, and made way for a passage leading to the central army position. However, Inoki, as the cage, looked at this scene that made Iwagakure lose face, but he did not blame, nor did he get angry. His lips trembled slightly for a while, and he stared blankly at Uchiha Chi who passed by him. Uchiha Chi, you have the power to kill us all. He helplessly grasped a stone under his feet, raised his head with a wooden face, and asked almost in despair, Why now? You don't kill us. Hearing this, Uchiha Chi paused, turned his head suddenly, looked down at Inoki indifferently, his face slightly strange, and then he said indifferently, which adult would get angry with an old man who is half buried in the ground? Are you done? He paused, then turned around and continued to move forward, almost in contempt, with a completely indifferent and defiant look on his face. That's good, get out. As the voice fell, Uchiha Chi took a step forward, following the path cleared by the Iwagakure on either side. Amidst a chorus of mixed gazes, he headed straight for the center of the Iwagakure army until he reached the prepared blood sacrifice altar. He gazed at his younger brother, hidden, bound to the cross within the triangular formation, fainting from the pain he had reached his limit. Uchiha Chi shook his head and sighed. He raised his palm and placed it over the bloody hole in the younger brother's body. His last chakra drew upon the natural energy of the atmosphere, transforming it into a sage power known as recell expulsion, helping Hidden mend his shattered body. Then, He silently carried the child on his back facing the Iwagakure army, and he walked away. However, his back seemed strangely comical as his pace grew increasingly rapid. Only then did the sensory ninja from the remaining Iwagakure troops guard squad finally realize and exclaim to Inoki, "Tsuchikage-sama, that guy, he's completely drained of chakra, he's all show now, a facade of strength, a weak one at heart. He's just faking it, really." Inoki sighed, raised his head, and gazed at the receding figure in the distance. A feeble, bitter smile crossed his face. Finally, exhausted, he waved his hand, "Retreat." Inoki had no way of knowing whether Uchiha Chi had truly reached his limit, nor could he verify the truth of the sensory ninja's words. Even if they were true, did Uchiha Chi truly lack the strength to fight a final battle? At this, Inoki felt only fatigue and fear. When you become powerful, people start calling you a threat. When you become even more powerful, they start calling you belligerent and terrifying. However, from bullying to fear, it all proves you're not strong enough. When you become even more powerful, your enemies' minds will be completely consumed by fear. They will begin to worship you as a god, for their life and death hang in your hands at a moment's notice. They can only pray that you are a god, not a demon. Inoki, one of them, suddenly thought this in a state of despair. In a single hour, he had pierced 3 layers of Kumagakure's defenses, exchanged barrages with a chakra cannon, and battled and defeated young AI, Killer B, the 3rd Raikage AI, the 7 Tails Jinchuriki, Han, the 5 Tails Jinchuriki, Shukaku, and Inoki, 6 Cage and Super Cage level gatekeepers. He had defeated and routed the 8,000 Kumagakure and 10,000 Iwagakure. Uchiha Chi now felt dizzy, his flesh limp, his chakra depleted, his natural energy drained, his eyes drained. An unprecedented sense of weakness washed over him at that moment. The reason he hadn't eliminated the remaining Iwagakure troops, numbering less than 1,000, wasn't because of Uchiha Chi, but because this guy was truly exhausted. At this point, every cell in his body was beginning to resist natural energy. If he stayed there, the remaining Iwagakure troops would truly be able to chop him into pieces. So, he could only force a powerful expression, snatching his younger brother from the remnants of the Iwagakure troops and being forced to act big. At this moment, finally beyond the limits of what a regular ninja could perceive, Uchiha Chi, carrying Hidden on his back, panted heavily. His body began to sway, his vision blurring. His strength was so exhausted that he felt his toes and crown chafing, wailing for a lie. And just at this moment, behind him, the little brat with silver hair and a slicked back hair and blood on his forehead muttered and opened his eyes in confusion. See, Fedouin exclaimed, looking at the Uchiha Chi in front of him with a face as ugly as gold paper, breathing heavily, as if a gust of wind could blow him down. "Damn it, big brother, why do you look like you just came out of a restaurant in the land of hot springs? Don't die in front of me." Hearing this, Uchiha Chi almost vomited 3 liters of blood on the spot in anger. He shook his body tremblingly, threw the slicked back brat to the ground with a flick of his hand, and gave him a slap on the face. "You brain-dead idiot, you still have the nerve to ask?" After being hit hard, Fedouin, who is between illiterate and cultured, raised his eyes in a daze. Obviously, this idiot didn't know that if being beaten hurts, it means he is not dreaming. "Huh? No wounds?" He first glanced at his intact body, and then looked at Uchiha Chi with a look of sudden realization. "Could it be that you also failed in the assassination? Now, both of us are dead and in heaven, you idiot." Uchiha Chi stood up angrily, and was about to give him another slap. "Fuck you," but at this time, a gust of wind blew, and the already shaky Uchiha Chi finally lost his footing, and finally, he fell to the ground, unable to withstand the fatigue from all over his body, and fainted. Hidden glanced blankly, then helplessly helped Uchiha Chi to his feet, tugging at his collar. He gazed ahead at the lush, green path leading to nowhere. Finally, he sighed and said with a wry smile, "We've killed so many people, see. How can we expect any good reward? This must be hell. I wonder who we'll meet next, the evil god or the sage of 6 paths." However, just as Hidden finished his words, a sudden rustling sound like a snake slithered through the woods. Then, a hoarse, playful voice, quite coaxing even to a child, echoed in Hidden's ears, "It's me." Chapter 393 Orochimaru, "I want you to help me practice." Like a prickly hair poking into his ear, Hidden froze at the hilariously awkward greeting. When he saw the figure standing at the edge of the narrow, densely forested path, his pupils shrank. Big Orochimaru. Hidden's eyes widened, his hands and feet feeling cold and stiff, like the legs of an ox fresh from a freezer. He couldn't even take a single step. The figure before him was none other than Orochimaru, one of the 3 most renowned ninjas in the ninja world. He had only met him once before, in the cult's cave. The aura of that villainous boss was still fresh in Hiden's memory. But why was he here? And right in their path? But at this moment, he didn't have time to care whether the other party was going to skewer the 2 brothers and grill them. Oh no, it seemed that snakes like to eat them alive. You, get out of here. Fidouin took a step back, his heart getting colder and colder, and he wanted to cry but had no tears. He thought to himself, God damn it, why am I so unlucky? I just escaped from the clutches of Iwagakure, and now I'm going to fall into a snake's den. There was no other way, so he had to bite the bullet and put on a brave face. Do you know the 3rd Hokage? That was the one who killed him. If you don't get out of here, I'll peel off your snake skin. Looking at the sweaty little brat with silver hair and a mouth harder than a duck, Orochimaru looked at Hiden from top to bottom with interest. Then, he chuckled hoarsely, Hey, little brat, do you want to save your big brother? Hiden was stunned for a moment, and turned his head abruptly to look at Uchiha Chi, who was lying at his feet, his face as pale as a piece of white paper. Seeing that he seemed to be breathing in more than breathing out, in fact, he was constantly strengthening his body under the effect of the sage stance, his heart was in his throat. Seeing this, he gritted his teeth and looked back at Orochimaru. What do you want me to do? Who do you want me to kill? No, I'm not interested in you killing anyone. Orochimaru narrowed his eyes, staring at the ritual of the evil gut hanging on Hidouin's waist, and smiled faintly. Hidouin, right, I want you to help me practice, huh? More than half a month passed in a flash. On this day, Uchiha Chi had a nightmare. In the dream, he first came to the set of White Snake, and then the scenes in the dream began to gradually become distorted. Normally, the ending should be that Fahey raised the bull and shouted to the White Snake, Snake Demon, I want you to help me practice. But at that moment, the entire scene suddenly shifted forward, the style shifting. The muscular White Snake, sporting the air of a Hong Kong comic book hero, had reversed course, having previously abducted Fahey from his youth into a cave. It cried out, Little ghost, I need your help in my training. What the hell? Uchiha Chi jolted awake, flexing his body 90 degrees, his eyes wide with horror. And then, he saw, a small, dark face, dark with resentment, standing before him. A broom was in hand, scratching the surface of what looked like a cave. Finally awake, the slicked-back kid looked over in surprise. Huh? Hidden. Uchiha Chi raised an eyebrow, glancing at his younger brother's attire. He wore a pale gray, slashed uniform resembling the Sound 5, with a rope tied at his waist like Orochimaru's. He realized that Orochimaru must have picked him up after he passed out. This wasn't surprising, though. His arrival in Kumagakure was Orochimaru's original plan, and it was entirely predictable. Ever since Orochimaru left Konoha and launched the Kumagakure collapse plan, he'd been keeping an eye on him, likely waiting for him to fall before the mighty Iwagakure, so he could snatch him away. But plans couldn't keep up. No one could have predicted that Uchiha Chi, relying solely on his main Gekyo Sharingan, would be able to pierce the Iwagakure. At this moment, Fidouin looked at Uchiha Chi who had woken up, with trembling lips, and pounced on him. He grabbed Uchiha Chi's hospital gown, put his arms around his waist, with an expression of wanting to cry but not tears on his face. You are finally awake. In order to save you, this uncle signed an indenture to sell himself. Damn, I actually have to work for that snake for 10 years. Uchiha Chi blinked and looked at Fidouin in astonishment. After pondering for a moment, he said silently, then you were completely deceived by Orochimaru, not to mention that he was originally my teacher. He would take what he could get. A tough guy like me doesn't need you to save me. I only need sunlight, air and water, and I can heal myself. After boasting here, Uchiha Chi stopped talking, thinking, isn't this just calling himself a vegetable? He immediately stopped talking. When Hidouin heard this, he opened his mouth wide with a look of shock. What? I was actually fooled by him. Then, he turned around with a look of shame and anger, and was about to rush out. I want to settle accounts with Orochimaru. Seeing this idiot turning around and leaving, Uchiha Chi quickly grabbed the rope tied on his back and said calmly, forget it, you'd better follow Orochimaru first. Although it was a bit surprising that Hidouin was accepted by Orochimaru, in the current ninja world, it is better for the little brother to follow Orochimaru than to be carried to death by the soup ninja again. Orochimaru likes research, but Hidouin has a smaller immortal body after all. Working part-time while studying with Orochimaru is better than losing his life anyway. By the way, how long did I sleep? Uchiha Chi moved his shoulders, listening to the creaking sounds, feeling his body, which was a little sore from sleep, and some strange changes that were happening in his body at this moment. There were also a lot of subtitles waiting to be read in the talent subtitle column. He looked at Feeden and continued to ask, "Now, what's the situation in the outside ninja world?" Hearing Uchiha Chi's question, Feeden was stunned for a moment, and then stared at Uchiha Chi's face. His eyes changed slightly. Then, as if relieved, he raised the corners of his mouth and slowly and excitedly recounted what happened afterwards. "You slept for 26 days, you didn't eat or drink. I was afraid you would starve to death, but Orochimaru said it didn't matter, you wouldn't die. He just taught me how to give you an IV, and then you waited like this for more than 20 days, and there's more, that's that." Uchiha Chi raised an eyebrow, looking at the excited Feeden. "Which that?" "Get to the point." Hidden bared his teeth, first punched Uchiha Chi's chest, and said with a grin, "My lord, I almost thought you had given up the promise you made in the land of hot water." He slightly restrained the smile on his face, looked at Uchiha Chi seriously, and took a deep breath. "But, you really did it, such a feat, with your own strength. You shocked the 5 major countries and ended the Third Shinobi World War." Chapter 394, One Person Stops the War. The name of the disease, despair. From hidden, Uchiha Chi roughly grasped what had transpired after his collapse. First, the Third Shinobi World War, which had stretched across the entire ninja world, had concluded prematurely, with a somewhat ironic outcome. The Third Shinobi World War had been at a stalemate for 2 weeks prior. The Land of Lightning and the Land of Earth had suffered heavy losses, the Akatsuki had split, and Yohiko and the other two had returned to the Land of Rain to pursue their peace. Another group, led by Madarumi, fled the pursuit of the rebel ninjas and their arrest warrant by the major powers, traveling to the isolated Land of Water. There, they established a fourth group, alongside the Elders, the Mizukage, and the Kirasame organization. Civil strife in Kirigakure continued. 3 of the 5 major nations were struggling to cope. 2 weeks prior, only the struggling Sunagakure was left standing on the front lines against Konoha. So, Raza decisively began to raise his vote. Sarutobi Hiruzen, adhering to the principle of peace, accepted Sunagakure's surrender. The 2 great powers, Redo and Tu, who had intended to pit their forces against each other, suffered not only defeat but also loss of both their own tail beasts, Jinchuriki, numerous elite troops, and all manner of intelligence were leaked and lost. Though unwilling, they could only silently abstain from voting when the Sunagakure voted. Furthermore, with a living Buddha Uchiha Chi still alive, possessing the power to single-handedly destroy an entire nation and even the vast majority of the forces of Redo and Tu in a single day, no great power, let alone an individual, dared to rashly initiate a larger war. Radical leaders within the Sunagakure camp had intended to seize this opportunity to invade the weakened Land of Earth to the north, but were swiftly removed from the meeting room by the 4th Kazakage, Raza, who had feigned death in a desperate attempt to escape the battle at Yunming City. Raza, along with his chair, was immediately suspended from his duties for reflection. Even the Chiao elders dared not express much opinion. The major ninja villages unanimously ignored the daimyo's call and immediately withdrew their hefty bounties on Uchiha Chi's head. However, at the daimyo's insistence, they maintained the wanted notices from Miyashiro-en, Kokuzu, Hazuki Mainjutsu, and others. Konoha even stated that the bar on Uchiha Chi's forehead protector was a joke. Konoha had never acknowledged Uchiha Chi as a traitor. On the contrary, he was a legitimate descendant of a noble clan, the founder of the 2nd clan, and the mentor of the 3 ninjas. He was undoubtedly a direct descendant of the Hokage. Within Konoha village, support for Uchiha Chi's candidacy for the 4th Hokage grew, though most still remembered him as a skilled river sweeper selling pots. In one battle, the 6-tailed beasts that had maintained a precarious balance of power among the nations were annihilated at once. All the great powers turned their attention to the upcoming resurrection tournament for the 6-tailed beasts, the 1-tail, the 4-tail, the 5-tail, the 7-tail, the 8-tail, and the missing 2-tail. 10 days prior, the Sunagakure clan unexpectedly launched a coup against a daimyo. A Kazakage named Luo officially began his career of selling blood for money. 5 days prior, the daimyo of the Thunder and Water Kingdom suddenly died of a catastrophic illness. and the ceremony commemorating his son's ascension to the throne attracted considerable attention. Then, the daimyo of the land of Earth, for interfering in village affairs, stepped out of the gate with his left foot first, an act perceived as an insult to the Hokage. A bolt of white light descended from the sky, razing the daimyo's mansion to the ground. The land of Earth thus became an independent nation ruled by ninja masters, instantly surpassing its contemporaries by 20 years. The glory of the 5 great daimyo faded. Only the land of fire survived, thanks to the support of the Fire Temple, the Shugonin, and the mediation of Sarutobi Hirozen. However, when the daimyo's authority and prestige, wielding the might of the entire world to fight against rebellious forces, was trampled upon by a 12-year-old Uchiha, and reduced to laughingstock, the land of fire daimyo ultimately found himself unable to stand alone. The day was nigh for him to surrender his treasury and land, his existence in name only, and the day was nigh. The wanted notices for those associated with Uchiha Chi soon faded. The age of ninjas had arrived at the settlement node. This is a glimmering age of ninjas. Uchiha Chi flipped open the pile of subtitles, his gaze instantly drawn to the bottom line, gleaming with brilliant golden light. Based on the macho coefficient multiplication, under the leadership of employee Uchiha Chi, the ninja war ceased, ushering in a monumental transformation. But remember, don't be blinded by fleeting glimpses. Warfare continues, and the true masterminds of this chaotic world are still lurking behind the scenes, attempting to stir up a new wave of chaos. You receive a settlement reward from Shiandao Company, a 0.1 correction to your original plane's distortion, the basic coordinates of the ninja realm, and 1 opportunity for a projection return. Projection return, a precious opportunity to return to your original world and bring your own power, after the correction of your spiritual base, back to explore your original plane. Note, use with caution, and only when you are absolutely confident in your own abilities. Looking at the last line of subtitles, Uchiha Chi couldn't help but frown. What does this mean? In his previous life, he supposedly lived in a peaceful environment. Even if there was war, it wouldn't reach his home for more than a decade. But these subtitles made it seem as if his home was on fire, waiting for him to act as a firefighter. But soon, as this thought took hold, new subtitles appeared beneath the last one in his field of vision, as if answering his questions. According to the normal course of history, a dragon-level catastrophe is erupting on your plane. At first, no one paid much attention, believing it to be just a minor cold, but as some people contracted the illness and it gradually worsened, it attracted considerable attention. Name of the disease, despair. 10 days later, the catastrophe erupted, wiping out all intelligent life on Earth within half an hour, bringing the end of civilization. You have been chosen to become a heaven-sent hero, drawing strength from the chaos to change this outcome and keep civilization alive. Please continue your efforts to completely end the chaos and gain more precious opportunities for projection return. Hey, what's wrong with you? See, at the side, Fidouin looked at Uchiha Chi, who was suddenly stunned on the hospital bed, his eyes wandering in the air, as if he was looking at something that didn't exist. He raised his hand and waved in front of his eyes. Hey, I was just talking about that bastard Orochimaru. He had nothing better to do than bring us 2 brothers to the wind country to eat sand. You have to persuade him. This damn place is too hot. I'm about to get a heat stroke. Laulan, there's nothing but a bunch of towers. If you ask me, why don't we go to the water country to redress that woman Madarumi? I heard that her situation is not very good over there. What do you think? Fidouin's voice seemed to be separated by a layer of membrane, faintly echoing in his ears. Uchiha Chi was brought back to reality by his voice in a trance. He recalled what his little brother had just said, and the whole person was stunned again, as if he remembered something. He suddenly raised his head and asked, "Where are you saying this?" Also, the Ghost Festival in the ninja world, how many days are there? Fidouin was amused by Uchiha Chi's words. He slapped his thigh and laughed. Laulan, this is Laulan. Also, today is Ghost Festival. Chapter 395, Wind Arrives, the Kingdom of Thousand Towers. The world is like a huge windmill, although it sometimes turns slowly, it's not worth seeing. The monotonous scenery will soon make people bored, but now, it's different. Wearing a classic snake-style combat outfit, with his long hair tied up in a ponytail, and a green jade earring hanging on his ear, Orochimaru stood on a sand dune with yellow sands flying all over the sky, with an unfathomable smile on his lips, staring at the front. In that endless and desperate desert, like a mirage, stood a huge city composed of thousands of high towers. When did it start? A gentle breeze that arose 3 months ago, now, it's become a hurricane sweeping across the entire ninja world, so violent it's impossible to look directly at it. Withered, decayed, weathered, false, the truth of history is peeling back its veil before us. I'm looking forward to it. Orochimaru smiled calmly, turning his head slightly to glance at the two people emerging from the cave behind the sand dunes. My disciple, what do you think? I don't know. Uchiha was stunned and replied subconsciously, still looking a little confused. He had just been exposed to the harsh environment of the Wind Country and was about to ask our snake teacher what he thought and what this ghost festival celestial phenomenon he mentioned earlier was. But as soon as he left the house, he ran into Orochimaru. Like one of those modern poets who is almost penniless, he was mumbling some incomprehensible words and seemed to be about to ask if his writing was good. Uchiha's face turned serious. He thought, you've hid a hole in my knowledge. How should I answer? Did he even start clapping and saying, great. Chunchi Yanayan, fortunately, Hidden, who was determined to get even with Orochimaru, came to the rescue. He leaped forward with a look of you fucking lied to me, and tried to grab Orochimaru's belt, angrily barking, Orochimaru, I'm losing money and helping you with your problems, and you're actually lying to me, your teacher. Wait, what the hell are you talking about? Before Orochimaru could even begin to speak, Uchiha was stunned. He could imagine that Hidden, an illiterate man, couldn't say anything nice. He could also imagine that Hidden had been tricked by Orochimaru, even having to work for him for 10 years for nothing. Now, the two of them were in a relationship of a ruthless boss with a mysterious XP and a delicate servant. But listen. Hidden said he helped Orochimaru with his problems? And, Hidden, actually became Orochimaru's teacher? So we have to call you, Hidden, Master? What the hell is going on with this mess? See, you don't need to persuade me, I've already thought about it. Hidden turned his head with a determined look on his face. From now on, you can call me Master, and I'll call you Big Brother. Orochimaru will call me teacher, and I'll call Orochimaru boss. Let's talk about our own things. No one needs to feel bad. Bang. Uchiha withdrew his hand expressionlessly. Hidden squatted on the ground, sobbing, holding his head. Orochimaru turned around and looked at the scene with a frown on his forehead. Well, this is it. The artistic conception he had created with great difficulty in this remote place like the Wind Country, an atmosphere suitable for teaching, learning and solving problems. It's all gone. After a moment's hesitation, rather than continue his pretense, Orochimaru opted to quietly explain the mess. I took the brat's evil god ritual, huh? Uchiha looked up, stunned. So, what Hidden said was true. You're truly worthy of me, Orochimaru. Not only did you trick Hidden into doing 10 years of unpaid child labor, you also had him hand over the secrets of the evil god cult of the Land of Hot Springs. It's just that this trick of deceiving a child was a bit shabby. However, putting aside this rather awkward generational quip, Uchiha looked at Orochimaru in surprise. What do you want to do? The evil god ritual was the last relic left to Hidden by Hayato Togo, the former leader of the Jonin squad of the Land of Hot Springs and leader of the evil god cult. It contained a record of all the rituals and spells related to the evil god, and it was the foundation of Hidden's subsequent self-cultivation and his crucial role in Iwagakure's war against the Third Raikage. The most valuable of these is the ritual that grants the immortality curse. However, the immortality often overlaps with Orochimaru's own abilities, and in some areas conflicts significantly with the principles of his original research, resulting in significant limitations. Its mechanism is somewhat similar to that of immortality reincarnation, focusing on locking the soul within the body. Even if the body sustains a fatal injury, it remains immune to death. Furthermore, influenced by the power of an evil god or the soul, the body also gains a degree of resistance to ninjutsu and self-repair. Orochimaru's undead reincarnation relies on constant body replacement to achieve immortality, while the undead essentially blocks the path to undead reincarnation. The two are theoretically incompatible. Faced with Uchiha's question, Orochimaru quickly understood what he was worried about, but he merely curled his lips slightly and smiled. Even gods can be fooled. Uchiha was secretly shocked. After mastering the mass production technology of the tailed beast's chakra, Orochimaru had also made some subtle breakthroughs in the art of immortality, even devising a way to fool the evil gods. However, recalling how Orochimaru had successfully fooled the Shinigami summoned by the Shikifujin at the end of the Fourth Shinobi World War in the original story, Uchiha felt relieved. There are so many geniuses in this world, There are always some who can achieve things that ordinary people cannot. He didn't ask further. While the paths of master and disciple overlapped, they were not identical. Uchiha Chi had different ideas about his own path. Let's talk about this later. See. You should already know what you've learned by now. What day is it today? Orochimaru chuckled, turning to gaze at the blazing sun over the desert. The sky was cloudless, the sun long and high. A brilliant light illuminated the pearls of the earth. It was a civilization unlike any we have seen today, with countless towering towers lining the sky. The desert wind whipped fiercely across, stirring up vast waves of sand, but ultimately stopping just before the city's astonishing height. This was the Thousand Towers, Laolan. Gazing upon this scene, Uchiha Chi took a deep breath and spoke in a deep voice. You once said, the white snake sage who stole my heart and my tailed beast, on the night of July 15th, the day of the Ghost Festival, when the gates of hell open and the moon is devoured by the Tengu, the coldest night in the entire ninja world. A ritual will be held within the Laolan dragon vein of the Wind Kingdom, to seize the dragon's body and cross the dragon gate, to become the first and last immortal dragon of this era. Uchiha Chi paused, his lips curled slightly, a look of determination flashing in his eyes. And we have come to slay the dragon and ascend to immortality. Chapter 396, Gathering and Dispersing Quicksand, Chain Reaction. Like quicksand, it gathers when it's advantageous and disperses when it's not. The wind can disperse quicksand, but it can also spread everywhere, penetrating every pore. This is precisely the reality of the Wind Country today. 10 days ago, the Sand Village, unexpectedly, launched a coup d'etat against the daimyo's power within the ninja world. There were many reasons, but the core was money. The Wind Country daimyo, unreliable and unwilling to pay, indulged in his own carefree lifestyle, neglected his military, and willingly served as a subordinate to the Fire Country daimyo. By selling missions available to the Sand Village ninja to Konoha, he hoped to secure the Fire Country's protection and avoid war and the cost of war at its root. Consequently, cut off from their economic lifeline, the loss of their tailed beasts, and their war potential drastically reduced, the Sand Village, cornered, was handed a hammer and shown how to proceed. They resolutely launched the coup. The coup d'etat launched by the ninja, whose profession was to scale walls and live on the edge of a knife, against the powerless nobles and wealthy men, was, unsurprisingly, successful. But in the end, the bitter laughter and angry curses of the daimyo of the Land of Winds still lingered in the heart of the fourth Kazakage, Raza. Before that guy died, his nose was full of snot and tears, but he glared at Luoshak with a twisted and angry expression, pointing at his nose and angrily cursing, Luoshak, Luoshak, you are powerful, you are noble, you are amazing, but, you think that by killing me, you can end the tragedy of the Wind Kingdom? Ha 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 ha. Stop dreaming. You only see that I spend money like water and have servants like clouds, but you have never thought about how much money I can spend alone, and you Luoshak, your Sand Village, in this country with no birds or animals and endless deserts, are dreaming of being on par with the Fire Kingdom. And supporting tens of thousands of ninjas who spend money like water, you have knelt in front of my door countless times, asking me to scrape every drop of oil and water from this barren land, and then feed it into your mouth with my own hands. But now, you actually want to kill the chicken to get the eggs and drain the pond to catch fish. This country is already distorted, and now you've added fuel to the flames. I can already see your death, Rosa. You will become the greatest sinner in the history of Wind Country and Sand Village, and I will send you off. With that, the daimyo of Wind Country, with a black beard, a face full of flesh, and richly dressed, with a ferocious expression, slashed his throat with his blade before Raza, then collapsed to the ground. Within the magnificent halls, separated by a single door, silence and cheers were deafening. The Sand Village, having completed the coup, did not achieve salvation as expected. Instead, it quickly fell into even greater chaos. After wiping out the daimyo and even all the nobles in this land, they found little profit. Raza, the fourth Kazakage, launched a coup to resolve the Sand Village's root problems. He was ultimately embarrassed to discover that the Sand Village, developed through aggressive military expansion by the Wind Country to maintain its status as one of the 5 great nations, was the true source of this problem. 7 days ago, sitting on the throne of the Kazakage and monarch of the Wind Country, Raza couldn't help but frown. Money, money, money. How on earth is he going to make money in this godforsaken place? For a moment, Raza sighed in worry and scratched his head. At that moment, his pregnant wife, Giallo, opened the door and softly warned, Laosha, there's a letter from Laolan City. The sender is in Lushan Laolan City, a towering city that inexplicably emerged in the desert 6 years ago, is currently ruled by a queen named Sasha. Due to its lack of commercial activity and location outside an oasis, it levies little taxation. Technically, within the Wind Kingdom, it's called a city, while other nations, guided by geography and the Wind Kingdom's exclusive responsibility for the oases within its territory, refer to it as the Kingdom of Laolan. Unlushan, the Queen's advisor, is a reliable man who, through his exceptional puppetry skills, has driven Laolan City's rapid development. Unlushan, Luosha took the letter, opened it and read it, a huge amount of puppets, weapons, and war materials for sale, for free. This small town is so rich. The request is just to invite the strongest people from the Sands village on July 15th to protect the city from the ghosts that may be attracted on the night of the Ghost Festival. Luosha had a strange look on his face, rubbed his eyes, and read the letter carefully again. Ghosts? How can such things exist in the ninja world? How ridiculous. As the prime minister of a country, you are afraid of such insignificant things. Luosha couldn't help but smile embarrassedly, and looked up with green eyes. Gararu, help me reply to the blackmail letter. No, calm them down. Soon, in the Sand Village, Unlushan's show of wealth took action. Yura, who had infiltrated the upper echelons through the Yunming City operation, quietly passed this information to other parties. In the land of water, the night was like water. On an island, a tall mansion was built next to it. The room was filled with various steel parts. Squeak, a bright beam of light suddenly pierced through the roof, causing Uchiha, who had just coaxed his daughter to sleep next door, to curse loudly. It's the middle of the night, are you going to sleep or not? Inside the house, shirtless, red-haired Scorpion stared at the brilliant chakra ring glowing on his chest and smiled excitedly. He felt a surge of strength filling his entire body, and with one punch, he could silence the loudly shouting red eyes next door. Sure enough, the tailed beasts are equivalent to clean energy. This way, I can also create celestial phenomena like that with a wave of my hand. Haha, Uchiha Chi, I'm going to catch up with you soon. After laughing, Scorpion's face turned stern again, and his brows furrowed deeply. The only problem now is that woman won't let me touch the Vulpix anymore. Uchiha Chi's technology for replicating the tailed beast's energy is in Orochimaru's hands. I can't find anyone else and there's no way to steal it, and I can't just kill Uchiha Chi's girlfriend. Stealing the Vulpix is such a hassle. At this moment, a puppet bird streaked through the air and suddenly broke through the mansion's barrier, setting off a series of alarms. Amidst the curses from next door, is it information about Yura? Sergeant, what big move is Tsunagakure making? Scorpion looked up, a look of mild surprise on his face. He took the bird and removed the letter from its belly. That idiot Raza wants to take over Laolan's 1,000 towers, huh? There's even a dragon vein in this place, an endless source of energy. Scorpion narrowed his eyes as he examined the information in his hand. 5 of the tailed beasts in the ninja world had been wiped out at once, with one missing. The remaining 3, 6, and 9 were closely guarded, leaving him with no idea where to begin. And now, to hear that his own family possessed an infinite supply of chakra? Haha. That's truly effortless. Scorpion raised his lip and looked up at the sky. The next moment, he spread his hands, and the tailed beast reactor in his chest glowed with overload. A burst of blue flames erupted from his palms and soles. The immense thrust transformed into kinetic energy, propelling Scorpion straight out of the large hole in the roof, tracing a parabola and leaving behind a tremendous supersonic roar before disappearing into the night sky of the land of water. Woo-wah, the baby girl's cry suddenly rang out, leaving only Miyashiro and next door, who was holding the bottle and gritting his teeth because his daughter was awakened by the sonic boom. Red, Sand, Scorpion, is there no one who can control this guy? Chapter 397 The Lost Tower, Uzumaki Naruto. At this moment, in another time and space, a fierce wind whipped the yellow sand into a whirlwind, forming a rapidly migrating sandstorm across the desert. Amidst the shattered ruins beneath the sandstorm, a squad of 4 swooped down, chasing a sullen, emaciated man with short brown hair. Centipede. Surrender, however, the man raised his head and glanced disdainfully at the new Team 7, led by the older Yamato, Naruto, Sakura, and Sai. It seems you've arrived too late. With that, he crouched in the center of the ruins, amidst a dilapidated tower altar pierced by a strangely shaped kunai. Purple lines appeared on his body, completely devouring the seal beneath him. As long as I incorporate the power of the dragon veins into my puppetry, he said, eyes widening as he drew his kunai. This way, I will dominate not just the 5 great nations, but the entire world. Stop, Naruto roared as he rushed forward, facing a sudden explosion of a 10-meter thick purple beam of light. However, he was completely engulfed by the beam. The next instant, a slight ripple in space-time rippled, sending the centipede, Naruto, and Yamato, who were engulfed in the beam, to different points in time. That's Laolin, gazing at the approaching, seemingly imaginary city comprised of thousands of Gothic towers. Uchiha Chi marveled. He wondered if they added light strips outside each tower, it would immediately give off a cyberpunk vibe. There are many centric puppets outside. No, big brother, shall we just walk in directly? On the side, Fidouin was looking at the tall puppets that looked like stone statues flying back and forth between the towers and hiding in the shadows on the other side, and he shuddered. What else? Uchiha Chi turned his head away. Uchiha can go wherever he wants. Or, will you let me go back? Fidouin frowned and said bitterly, those puppets have their own rotary blades and spiral spikes. Although they won't kill me, they will hurt too. Look at your little ability. Don't worry, just lead the way this time. Looking at the little brother who was sent by Orochimaru to scout the terrain several times and was scared by a bunch of puppets, Uchiha Chi raised his eyebrows slightly. If you want to use the evil god cult's curse well in a real battle, the key is physical ability. Orochimaru is honing your physical skills. It seems that the effect is not bad. Simply talking about physical skills, you are now an excellent genin. What? I have been through life and death 7 or 8 times, and I am just a genin. Fidouin complained unwillingly. After all, I should be a special chunin. Uchiha Chi twitched his mouth slightly, did not respond to this, walked straight forward, and officially stepped into the range of the 1,000 Towers. Laolin, known as the 1,000 Towers, corresponds to the Lost Tower chapter in the original manga. This story unfolds over a decade later, after Jiraiya's death and just before Pain's invasion. Naruto, while hunting the ambitious centipede, is transported to the past by the power of a dragon vein, embarking on an adventure to Laolin's Peak. The time period Naruto arrives in should be the same era as Uchiha Chi's current time. It's still during the Third Shinobi World War, before Minato Namikaze became the 4th Hokage. It remains to be seen whether Naruto and Minato have already met and sealed the dragon vein, or whether they haven't, perhaps unfolding some time later. And if he accidentally destroyed the city while capturing the White Snake Sage, would the future events still unfold? Recalling the events of the original manga, Uchiha Chi stepped into the towers. As if sensing the approach of an invader, cold purple gazes suddenly lit up from the surrounding towers. Immediately afterwards, 6 puppets, resembling miniature Gundams, leaped from the sky, swinging their rotating drills and fan-like slicing blades at Uchiha Chi's head. How could this happen? This position should be vulnerable. Hey, see, be careful. Hidden couldn't help but exclaim in surprise. However, Uchiha Chi didn't even bother to look up. He casually pulled 2 shurikens from the ninja tool bag at his waist, pinched them between his fingertips, and flung them away. The shurikens drew 2 spiraling arcs and shot out in a rapid spiral. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. As if slicing through some non-existent thread, severing their energy supply, the 6 mighty puppets plummeted to the ground like kites with broken strings. In the original story, Naruto had to fight hard to defeat each dragon vein puppet with a Rasengan. Now, before Uchiha Chi, they were just playthings. Or rather, for the Uchiha, a master of shuriken jutsu and a fighter relying on his eyesight, puppetry was inherently countered. Gazing at the paralyzed puppets before him, Uchiha Chi fell silent. He felt as if he had reached the maximum level and returned to the novice village. The ninja world's map seemed a bit off, too. He felt like these enemies were more in line with his leveling curve when he first left the village. Puppets are controlled by chakra. To defeat them, you have to pinpoint their weak points. Otherwise, your attacks will be in vain. He pointed at the puppet's weak points and was about to offer a brief lecture to his younger brother when, in the distance, the ripples of intense battle suddenly erupted. Uchiha Chi looked up and vaguely seemed to see a familiar yellow-haired figure flash by. Is that Minato? Blinking, Uchiha Chi immediately dragged Hidden forward with him, a smile on his face. Come on, follow me to the front, it seems like there's something exciting going on the other side. Damn it, the dusty-faced yellow-haired boy, holding a blue chakra short knife, jumped awkwardly between the tall towers, dodging the various ninja tools shot by the puppets. Round after round, if they keep appearing like this, even with a chakra knife, there's no way to deal with them all. Naruto finally defeated the first round of puppets after mastering the use of the chakra knife in the battle. But as if he had poked a hornet's nest, 4 more puppets flew down from the top of the higher tower. Looking at this scene, Naruto's face was slightly bitter. He was about to dodge the ninja tool, but at this moment, the flying puppet suddenly took off its visor, and a cannon barrel extended from its face. Purple dragon vein energy converged frantically from the cannon barrel sprouting from his face, then transformed into a thick, purple beam that shot down. Hiss! Naruto was startled, too late to dodge. Bang! The bridge connecting the 2 towers collapsed instantly, and Naruto plummeted from mid-air, slamming into the rubble of a building. Pain, 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 he grumbled, struggling to his feet and clutching his injured leg. As he looked up, 4 mid-air puppets had already flown in front of him, forming a formation. From the jet holes in their chests, a storm of ninja tools laced with purple chakra was unleashed. However, just as Naruto opened his eyes wide and was about to be forced to use the power of the 9 tails, boom, suddenly, a red-haired figure flew in from nowhere, and the huge gust of air created by his movement instantly blew away the 4 puppets. Then, he raised his palm nonchalantly, and a dazzling light cannon lit up in his palm, and in an instant it spurted out, turning into a light that swept across. The 4 puppets were instantly blasted into scrap metal. Naruto looked at the person in surprise, his eyes widening. You are Scorpion of the Red Sand? Oh? Have you heard of me? Scorpion turned his head and raised his eyebrows slightly. The next moment, a look of surprise and ecstasy rose on his face. Huh? 9 tails. Chapter 398, Technology vs. Tailed Beasts, Father and Son Meet. At that moment, looking at the yellow-haired boy lying on the ground, wearing a yellow and black tracksuit with a gray mesh tights underneath and a Konoha forward protector, Scorpion's face suddenly broke into a relieved smile. Ha ha ha, it really was easy to get. He was just in need of a tailed beast to build a reactor, and right before his eyes, a brand new 9 tails Jinchuriki appeared. It was none other than the Uzumaki woman from Konoha, who had a good relationship with Uchiha Chi and was the wife of the Yellow Flash. Now, he could proceed without any worries. Kid, can you lend me something? Meanwhile, Naruto was even more surprised by the red-haired young man who looked familiar, yet something seemed off. Red Sand Scorpion? Aren't you dead? Clearly, their conversation was in a completely different dimension. In Uzumaki Naruto's timeline, he had already carried out the mission to recapture the Kazekage and witnessed the death of Chiao's grandson, the Akatsuki Red Sand Scorpion. And now, a dead man appeared before his eyes. Could this be a ghost? Naruto was immediately frightened and used his hands and feet to move backwards. However, this action caused Scorpion to misunderstand him. Huh? What are you talking about? Well, don't resist, it will be over soon and there will be no pain. A sneer appeared on Scorpion's face. He raised his palm, and a scarlet light extended from his palm to his arm, all the way to the tailed beast reactor on his chest. A dark and deep sphere quietly emerged from his palm. Wait, is this the tailed beast ball? Aren't you a puppeteer? Naruto was completely stunned for a moment. Looking at the sphere in front of him, his scalp tingled. He knew the terrifying power of this thing, as he had personally used the hollow dog cannon on Orochimaru. And now, with his leg injured, he couldn't avoid it and could only resist. Although Naruto didn't understand what was going on, he had no choice but to use it. With this thought in mind, Naruto gritted his teeth, no longer hesitating, channeling the 9 tails within him. A flash of crimson gradually stained his eyes. Roar. While Naruto in the original story appears to be a good-natured young man who often uses his rhetoric to persuade his enemies, that's only after he's already defeated them. Meanwhile, Shisui, while seemingly a calm, red-haired handsome man, actually possesses a short temper and a short temper. The clash of these 2 fiery tempers escalated the battle instantly. Naruto, his 4 tails swaying behind him, collided with Shisui, who, having constructed a tailed beast reactor and become the Iron Man of the ninja world and possessed the power of a massive chakra cannon, instantly clashing. Wow! Amazing! Sitting atop the tower, Uchiha Chi gazed at the 2 young men engaged in a chaotic brawl below, gasping in amazement. Holy crap, Scorpion's gear is so cool, the Iron Man of the ninja world, tisk, is that the prince's 4 tails form? Holy crap, anime has come to life. Feeling like he was watching a unique, ultra-clear movie, Uchiha Chi exclaimed that this was a maneuver he had never seen before. His only feeling was, awesome. At that moment, a figure suddenly appeared before Uchiha Chi and Hidden, who lay sprawled atop the tower, slightly afraid of heights. This figure had long blonde hair and wore a different, Konoha-style black and gray vest. It was none other than Minato Namikaze. Behind him, two more figures quickly appeared. One was portly, the other carrying a large gourd and wearing sunglasses. They were Akimichi Choza and Aburame Shimi, who had been assigned to Minato's mission. They were also the fathers of Akimichi Traji and Aburame Shino, two of the future 12 of Konoha. See, why are you here? Standing beside Uchiha Chi, Namikaze Minato felt a slight headache. Recently, Konoha's spies within Tsunagakure reported that Tsunagakure was secretly building war weapons in Laulan. Their leader, Unlushan, had close ties with the upper echelons of Tsunagakure and seemed interested in providing a standard puppet army. Meanwhile, remnants of Laulan had traveled thousands of miles to Konoha, requesting aid from the third Hokage, tasked with protecting the queen. To eliminate the threat from the Wind Country, the third Hokage dispatched a four-man team consisting of Minato, Aburame Shisui, Akimichi Choza, and Hatake Kakashi. Minato had actually arrived before Shisui, and it was logical that he should have rescued the yellow-haired brat who had struck such a likable chord with him. However, at that moment, he sensed a strangely familiar chakra wave, realizing that Uchiha Chi was there. He immediately suppressed his urge to meet Uzumaki Naruto and came to meet Uchiha Chi. Compared to Scorpion of the Red Sand who is attacking the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki, at this moment, no matter how much Minato trusts him personally, Uchiha Chi, who has disappeared for almost a month after single-handedly breaking through the Third Ninja World War, is the important person whose thoughts need to be found out. Moreover, Minato still had something to say to Uchiha Chi. It's not important. If you want me to go back to Konoha, then don't say anything, Minato. Uchiha Chi turned his head and looked at him with a smile. I don't want our friendship to be soured because of some insignificant things. Besides, I have things I must do. These things, neither Konoha nor you can interfere. When everything is over, I will go back and take a look. Hearing these words, Minato wanted to say something, but after thinking about it, he finally sighed and had to smile. Okay, Kushina asked me to tell you that she wants to invite you to her home for dinner and try her cooking. Remember to come. Uchiha Chi nodded, turned his head, and looked down with interest. At this moment, Four Tails Naruto accelerated to maximum speed from the high tower, leaping and running wildly, constantly dodging the chakra cannon shot by Scorpion floating in the air. At his side, the human puppet of the third Kazekage kept manipulating iron sand to form a high wall, blocking Naruto's way. Farther ahead, the human puppet of the swordsman Mifune, with only half a face visible, stood directly in Naruto's path, her scabbard drawn, ready to unleash a fatal blow. 3 cage-level masters against 1, this was the thorny nature of such a high-level puppeteer. Furthermore, Scorpion, now with upgraded firepower and component modifications, was even more formidable than Pain's 6 paths. Naruto had assumed that during the Kazekage recapture mission, Scorpion could be defeated by the combined efforts of Chihayo and Sakura, but now, facing this monster himself, he felt the full force of his strength. He wanted to know more than anything, how on earth had Sakura and Chihayo survived this creature's clutches. Meanwhile, Scorpion's expression grew increasingly impatient. His eyes flickered, silently catching sight of Uchiha Chi, now strutting atop the tower. His expression darkened, and as if trying to prove something, he placed his hand on the tailed beast reactor on his chest, twisting it slightly. Watching this scene, Uchiha Chi's brows twitched slightly, knowing that if the fight continued, whether it was Naruto unleashing 678 tails or Scorpion unleashing full power, the noise would be too loud. He immediately turned his head and looked at Namikaze Minato, smiled faintly and asked, "Come to think of it, that should be your Aunt Kushina's son. Don't you want to go and recognize him?" If you are listening to this novel on a channel other than Fanfic World, it means it was downloaded and re-uploaded without effort. We warmly invite you to visit our channel, Fanfic World. There you will find the original version of this story and many other novels of various genres. We look forward to seeing you dive into a world of incredible novels. Chapter 399 The Boy Who Scares the Nine-Tailed Fox. My and Kushina's child, Namikaze Minato was startled, his gaze fixed on Naruto below. After hearing Uchiha Chi's words, he finally understood the strange sense of familiarity he'd felt towards the child from the beginning. But how could that child below him contain the Nine Tails, a creature only possessed by a Jinchuriki like Kushina. Furthermore, he and Kushina weren't even married yet, so how could their son already be so grown? Puzzled, but still Minato, he quickly accepted the reality. Raising his head slightly, he gazed at the countless conduits connecting the 1,000 towers, channeling dragon power. A vague suspicion crossed his mind. Is this child from the future? A moment later, his eyes froze, and he donned his mask. With a flicker of movement, he vanished from the scene. Meanwhile, the battle on the field intensified. Shisui, the puppeteer, used subtle manipulation to force Uzumaki Naruto into continuous disadvantage, leading him into his own trap. The puppeteer, the third Kazekage, and Mifune's human puppets attacked simultaneously. A roaring chakra cannon, a spiraling spear of iron sand, and a figure who had remained motionless throughout the entire attack, suddenly unsheathed his sword. A crescent-shaped blade slashed directly at Naruto's chest and abdomen, who was struggling to withstand the first two attacks. Naruto's eyes widened, and he gritted his teeth. Not good, he had yet to complete his Sage Mode training, reconcile with the Nine Tails, and truly gain the power of the tailed beasts. His overall strength had only just reached cage level, and he felt somewhat inadequate against Scorpion, whose horizons had now been broadened. Captain Yamato is gone. If you continue to mobilize the Nine Tails power, the seal left by the lecherous sage will fail, but if he continued like this, he knew he would surely die at the hands of the deceased man who had mysteriously appeared before him, and his tailed beast would be taken away. With this thought in mind, he could no longer care about anything else. At the same time, the Nine Tails' sinister, yet bewitching voice echoed in his mind. Come on, little brat, accept me, accept yourself. This is the power you were meant to possess. Once you accept this power, no one in this world can stop you. He gradually lost himself in the violent emotions contained within this chakra. The near-infinite power brought him a confidence and arrogance that instantly pushed his emotional threshold. Years of bitterness and pain suddenly flooded his mind. A deeper crimson of evil chakra gradually dyed Uzumaki Naruto's eyes. In his inner world, Naruto, with a dazed look on his face, raised his hand to touch the seal that sealed the Nine Tails Iron Gate. However, at that moment, this is not yet a power you can control. A hand in a blue bodysuit and ninja armor suddenly reached out and grabbed Naruto's wrist, which was about to be unsealed. Naruto looked up in a daze and saw a man with blonde hair, wearing a Konoha Jonin vest and a mask. Somehow, he suddenly appeared in the spiritual world that only he and Sasuke had been to. Then, immediately behind the door, the Nine Tails roared at the man with a tone of utter fear and hatred. Eternal sister, there's something wrong. Is this the improved 8-trigram seal? Minato gazed at the scene behind the door, his eyes fearless, his brows slightly furrowed. The 8-trigram seal currently encasing Naruto was a version refined by his future self and modified by Jiraiya. He needed some time to study it before he could seal it properly. The only way to seal it quickly was to trigger 2 other chakras within the seal, seemingly left behind by himself, one of which might even be Kushina's. But doing so might disrupt the backup plan his future self had prepared for his child. Thinking of this, Minato looked up at Naruto. Let me get you out of this danger first. Wait a moment, I'll be right back. Wait, Naruto's heart trembled as he looked at the masked man who felt so familiar to him. Who are you? And how did you get here? Minato was startled for a moment, then smiled. Hold on. Don't be fooled by this power. True strength lies not on the number of ninjutsu you know, but in the perseverance within. If it's you, you'll succeed. I believe in you. With that, Minato vanished from his spiritual world. Naruto suddenly looked up, his reflection in the real world. He felt himself, struggling to resist Scorpion's attacks, suddenly embraced by a warm embrace, his entire body spinning as if the world were spinning. The next moment, his eyes blurred, and he was dragged back to the spiritual world by the nine-tailed fox again. The nine-tailed fox behind the door seemed to sense something that made it extremely uneasy. It stood on all fours, and its 9 wildly dancing tails stood up like hair. Kid, hurry, remove the seal, I will give you all the power of this ominous eye power. Cooperate with me to kill that guy immediately, hurry up, otherwise, today will be your death. What? Naruto was stunned for a moment, having never seen the nine-tailed fox lose its composure like this. However, at this moment, between the empty, water-filled whirlpool hall and the spiritual world, suddenly, a series of footsteps were heard. Click, click, click. You beast, you are deceiving people again. A cold sneer suddenly came from the darkness. Get back into your cage." Hearing this voice, the nine-tailed fox's red eyes widened, as if it had seen a vision of something that made the fox feel quite embarrassed. Its fur stood on end, and it stood up straight. This evil chakra is the main Gekkai of Sharingan. Its eye power is not inferior to that of Uchiha Madara. Then, completely confused and unaware of what had happened in such a short moment, Naruto saw a young Uchiha boy wearing a high-collared black shirt with the Uchiha clan emblem, wild long hair hanging down to his waist, a rope tied around his waist like Sasuke's as a belt, and 9-point bloomers. He had a handsome face and a slightly childish look, but he seemed to be a few centimeters shorter than Naruto. He slowly walked towards him. "Sasuke? No, that's not right." Although he has the same enviable face as Sasuke, his aura and power far surpass Sasuke's. Who is he? Naruto's heart trembled, and he couldn't help but glance at the nine tails in the door behind him. Compared to his own confusion about the resurrected scorpion, the nine tails could clearly call the blonde man Yandame. Now, perhaps it also recognized this suddenly appeared Uchiha boy? And at this moment, I have never seen you before, the new owner of the main Gekkai of Sharingan in the Uchiha clan, sensing the terrifying aura from the other party that was no less terrifying than Uchiha Madara's back then, purely honed by countless battles. The nine tails felt his scalp tingle. Widening his blood-red fox eyes, he demanded sternly, "Who are you?" Chapter 400, Listen Naruto, he is your father. Who are you anyway? The nine tails question shook the underground water in the vortex hall, creating huge ripples one after another. However, facing this question, Naruto saw that the wild Uchiha boy seemed to be too lazy to talk to the nine tails. Instead, he frowned and glared at him coldly. "Beast, are you deaf?" he shouted indifferently. "I told you, get back in the cage." How unreasonable. Even Uchiha Madara is not as arrogant as you, kid. It seemed as if he really treated it as a beast, and did not give it a chance to speak. The nine tails was so angry that its nose was crooked. It roared in anger, and a huge amount of chakra instantly escaped from its body, forming a storm, and blew towards Uchiha Chi. However, facing the chakra storm that nearly overwhelmed Naruto, forcing him to raise his arms to shield his face, Naruto saw the Uchiha boy who had suddenly appeared in his mind world merely frown. The next moment, flames erupted, and a skeleton emerged. A 70-meter-long hand, blazing with incandescent flames and etched with strange black patterns, suddenly extended from the skeleton surrounding him. Like a spirit, it pierced the sealed gate of Naruto's mind world. With a sonic boom cloud that instantly broke through hypersonic speeds and ripped through the air, it struck the nine tails in the face. Bang! With one punch, the nine tails was knocked to the ground. Then, with an open fist, fingers closed, it grasped the nine tails head with a crunching sound and slammed it into the groundwater-soaked floor. Pressing it against the smooth ground, it rubbing furiously. Roar! The terrifying power caused the nine tails to wail in agony. His entire spiritual world trembled violently, as if a Force 8 gale had suddenly erupted from the ground. Naruto was instantly ejected from his spiritual world. He opened his eyes abruptly and saw the Uchiha boy who had appeared in his spiritual world earlier, sitting on the edge of a tall tower, gazing at him with a half-smile. "Are you awake?" Nearby was a blond man wearing a monkey mask, a man he had met before. His voice was so gentle that it filled Naruto with a warm feeling. Meanwhile, the red-haired young man, Scorpion of the Red Sand, who had just engaged him in a fierce battle, now floated in mid-air in front of the tower. He snorted coldly at him, but his previous compulsion to kill him was gone. "I'm sorry, I can't remove the seal within you right now, so I had to call in some help. I hope you didn't get scared." Minato gave Naruto an embarrassed smile. Simple solution? That giant hand. Naruto was a little choked, and couldn't help looking at Uchiha Chi, who seemed to have just done something insignificant at this moment. At this moment, Naruto suddenly felt a headache, and some fuzzy memories that suddenly appeared collided with his own memories. He opened his eyes wide, looked at Uchiha Chi's face, and muttered in horror, "Is your face? I seem to have seen it on Shadow Rock." No, wait. Naruto suddenly turned his head and looked at Minato Namikaze beside him, looking at the outline of his face under the mask. "The one on Shadow Rock seems to be you. Is it the land of water or the land of fire? Also confusing. What's wrong with my memory? I remember I just came here to hunt down the centipede." For a moment, Naruto covered his head and scratched his head frantically, messing up his yellow hair. Minato turned his head and looked at Uchiha Chi, his eyes suddenly fixed. After thinking for a moment, he shook his head and advised Naruto, "Don't think too much. I am a ninja of Konoha just like you. This is Laolin. We are about to carry out a mission here. How about this, you rest here first and wait until our mission is completed, Laolin." "What? Can't?" Naruto was stunned after hearing this explanation. He looked at the prosperous city of 1,000 towers around him. This was completely different from the Laolin in his memory. But Laolin is clearly a lost ruin. After hearing this, Minato patted Naruto on the shoulder and explained, "That's the problem. You were probably transported to the past by the power of the Dragon Vein. This place is no longer the Laolin you remember, right?" Naruto suddenly remembered, and he shuddered. "If I'm here, then Centipede must be here too. He's my target. I must find him and stop him from seizing the Dragon Vein's power and ruling the world." Hearing this, Hiden, Sasori, Aburame Shiwei, Akimichi Choza, and Namikaze Minato all fell silent. They couldn't help but glance at Uchiha Chi, who sat at the top of the tower as if nothing had to do with him. What a joke, ruling the world. Have you asked this person? Finally, it was Minato who shook his head and said soothingly, "I will help keep an eye on the centipede you mentioned, but now, we have other tasks to deal with. You rest here and recuperate first. After the task is completed, I will help you find it." However, before Minato could finish speaking, Uchiha Chi, who was watching the scene of father and son meeting, but the father was unwilling to recognize his son, suddenly shook his head, put his hand on Minato's shoulder, and stopped him from continuing. "Enough, Minato, you can't solve the problem by avoiding it like this." Namikaze Minato was stunned, then gritted his teeth slightly, lowered his voice and leaned forward to whisper, "See, time travel is not a trivial matter. We must avoid letting both of us know more, otherwise it may have serious consequences in the future." However, Uchiha Chi ignored this insincere guy, but looked at Uzumaki Naruto, who was still distressed at the moment, showed an amused smile, and asked, "Hey, that yellow-haired kid, what's your name?" "Ah, me." Hearing this question, Naruto perked up, grinned and introduced himself. "My name is Uzumaki Naruto." "Very good." Uchiha Chi smiled and patted Naruto's shoulder, grinning. "Time and space are disturbed, and your memory will also be affected. You know very little about the past, and your memory of the future is no longer reliable, so you don't need to care about those things at this moment. You have been lost in the cracks of time. Only by defeating the centipede and solving this anomaly in time can you return to your world." Naruto frowned, not understanding what Uchiha Chi meant. Of course, it was right not to understand. Uchiha Chi didn't understand what nonsense he was talking about. He was just reversing the process based on the results of the original work. He then put his arm around Uzumaki Naruto's shoulders, raised his finger and pointed at the masked Minato Namikaze, and said with a faint smile, "Listen, Naruto, this guy, his name is Minato Namikaze. He is the future fourth Hokage. He is also your biological father." Hearing this, Naruto's eyes suddenly widened. What? End of this chapter. Thank you so much for reading until the end. Don't forget to give it a like. Looking for more exclusive content and immediate access? Subscribe to our Patreon. Remember, every like, subscription or donation encourages us to continue. Thank you all. See you in the next video.